Welcome back to another exciting edition of the Pointless Exercise podcast. It's time to remember that crap. I can't remember the name of it. Remember this crap
You had so many shows,
with my
so many things
fellow
going on.
crapper, Mike Donahue. Mike, how are you?
Uh, I'm good, Andy. I'm stoked because today's Immaculate Grid had the Cubs,
You did, and I got
and
to play some of my all-time favorites. Anytime I can use Jose Macias, it's a great day.
the
Um,
Gremlin.
so you and I know we're both huge fans of interleague and of especially of the Cubs White Sox series.
Yes,
So
always.
necessary every year. Um, but in honor of the Cubs and Sox renewing their non-rivalry this week, you and I are going to remember this crap. We're going to remember crap about the Cubs and the White Sox matchups.
Hmm.
So that'll be exciting. It's not that, I mean, now it's inevitable, right? There is no. I mean, there's you play everybody, so of course you're going to play the Sox. The
Hmm.
fact that the Cubs and Sox have to play in each park, though, is a remnant of Jerry Reinsdorf's outsized influence over the man he installed as interim commissioner for life, Bud Selig, because those are the only sellouts Jerry can count on. So he wasn't going to give those up.
Nope.
So I believe I should have looked this up. Wouldn't have been smart. Of course, remember this crap. It's not research this crap.
No, we're not. We're not. We're supposed to do minimal research.
I believe the only teams that have the two game series are like Cubs or Yankees Mets, Cubs White Sox, Giants
Angels.
A's,
Oh yeah.
Angels. I think you have to
Oh,
basically
and
share a city
a
or a
state.
bay.
The Royals would remember how annoyed we would get when the Sox were good and that we'd have to face them 6 times. The Cardinals would have to beat up on the shitty
Yeah,
Royals 6 times. So.
but that's a good question. I wonder if they still have to play the two and two. Maybe you do. Maybe they assigned that
No,
stupid
I don't. I
natural
thought with
rival.
this, I thought with no, there are two series this year because they play this week in Comiskey, right? And I know
No, I
they
know
play in
this. I mean,
regular.
those teams they have to play the two and twos. I don't know that every team
So Jerry loses
has a
one
two
game.
and
Yeah.
two with somebody else.
Right? Could it
Um,
just be the Cubs because like Jerry had to have his sellouts, and then it like wouldn't hard to probably convince the New York area, the other groupings to do the same. But now he may well be the only.
well,
You know, it,
I'm gonna look here real quick and see if the how many times the Cardinals play the Royals. I think that's a good test. Yes,
if it's four,
they still have the two games because in August, and this happens to the Cubs in August too. They have a Sunday off
oh,
because
Billy Sunday would
they're
be.
in Kansas City on Friday and Saturday, and they have no game on Sunday because they're only playing two. And the Cubs and Sox have that uh, when the Cubs are home, they play a
Really?
Friday, Saturday, and have Sunday off.
That's got to. So wow.
It's stupid.
That's
It is what it is.
well, like if you're an owner, aren't you like, God, what a missed opportunity? Like what, like
Well,
how?
for the Cubs, that's fine because today
They,
we're saying as the Cubs beat the Cardinals today. It's one of the few Sundays they've won on.
is that right?
Yeah, they were like
I didn't even
3-13 or something on, just like the Bears.
know
3-13 on they're 4-13 on Sundays now, just like the Bears.
that. Nicely played.
But one of the things I know we want to talk about is the fact that the Cubs, for time immemorial, were the lovable losers. They were the sad sack franchise in the
Yep.
third biggest city in America, despite the fact that that sad sack franchise has had a hell of a lot more success
Yeah.
than their crosstown rivals.
Yep. Which raises the question: what's worse, being known incorrectly as as the sad sack lovable losers, or just not even being considered at all?
Yeah. It's it is kind of funny, right? So like the White Sox. Now I didn't see it happen, so I don't know that it happened. I was told that the White Sox won the World Series in 2005,
Yep.
but nationally they're suffering an erasure, and it started during the Blackhawks championships, where um, the Sports Center, or I guess Versus or NBC or whoever was doing the playoffs would show uh, most recent championships in Chicago, and would just forget to put the 2005 White
Oh
Sox
yeah,
in.
it still
And then
happens.
when the
When
Cubs
they
won in 2016, it erased it forever because everybody's
it
it
obliterated
wasn't just it was the first World
name.
Series champion in Chicago in over 100 years, despite the fact the White Sox are like we won it 11 years ago. Like yeah, but
Yeah.
nobody gave a shit.
It's
So
it's just
tough.
and it fuels. It kind of comes back on us in a bit where Sox fans are tend to. This is a generalization, of course, but like that they're more obsessed with the Cubs than their own team. And I guess that constant lack of attention or respect can really drive you into a sort of psychosis.
Yeah, they have the little brother syndrome. The
And they
big
should.
brother
They
gets all
haven't
the
been
attention, and
right. And they haven't been around as long. They're part of the junior circuit.
yeah, I mean, and there were things like for the longest time they both played in two of the oldest ballparks, and they were both kind of shitholes, but the Cubs shithole was far more charming and looked a lot
It
better
was.
on TV.
It did. And even when
Um,
you were there, sorry to interrupt, but I like in the park is I'm sure you were you ever at Old Comiskey Park?
yeah, I think only once. My dad
Yeah,
wanted
I
to
was
make sure I saw it, so we went.
I was I was there very infrequently. I could count two hands for sure. I could count, possibly just one. And one thing I remember, and this ties into what my dad would always credit PK Wrigley of the Cubs with, yeah, and we've talked about it. We've spilled like probably thousands of vocal hours on everything. But PK Wrigley, a horrible baseball man, but one of his legacies is a legacy that still seems to be ingrained with the franchise is the ballpark. He took care of the
Yeah,
ballpark. He took care of the fans. He put all the games on TV. He did things, whether intentionally or not, that really built that brand and probably also built the lovable loser. But the ballpark, you've sat in my seats, which are way down the left field line, 204, and you notice like any modern stadium, they curve, right? So you can, not have to crane your neck, to see. And I only draw that comparison because I remember going to Old Comiskey as a kid, and like being down there, and it's like the game is if you're sitting in your seat and just like a normal person looking straight ahead, the pitcher's mound is if you're sitting down the left field in the left field line seats, the pitcher is like in your peripheral vision. You have to turn in your seat. So my dad gave PK Wrigley credit for at least like sacrificing several thousand seats. I mean, you look at attendance totals from Wrigley Field like in the 30s and 40s. Sometimes he used to go up to 50,000. I think he tore out a lot of seats to make the experience a little bit more pleasurable for the fans down the line as the field sort of grades, the
yeah,
seats would turn. Well, of course, Charles Comiskey and no knock on Bill Veeck because he had to be a shoestring owner because he was not part of the money class. It's a whole different story in and of itself. But through the years, Comiskey never did. The ownership of the White Sox never invested in that kind of a reconfiguration. So I remember what it was like being one of those shitty ballparks. You see them in all the black and white footage now, Griffith Stadium and Forbes Field. They all were probably like that. They weren't really, they didn't think about it. Wrigley exists now, and Fenway must have done something similar where
yeah,
the seats curve. But yeah, so Comiskey was weird and like weird, boxy and ancient, and it just didn't really, didn't feel that hospitable.
yeah. And when I say shithole about Wrigley, I meant it like in a charming way.
Affectionately.
It was old, and there were no there were very few amenities, but it was it was a much nicer place than Comiskey was. And then we would go to County Stadium, and Jesus,
That's a modern one of the
it's
three.
like going to the fairgrounds. It's like
It's like, well, that's 30
what the hell
years younger than the other ones.
is there a tractor pull, or are they going to play baseball? What is going on up here? Uh, we went to Busch Stadium 2, I guess, right? Because then Sportsman's Park becomes Busch Stadium 1 eventually.
I defer to you. You seem to have that history
And
down.
that was when
Sure.
and that's why I call it the big urinal cake, because man, it smelled like piss in there. It was just amazing. It was a hot, humid July day in St. Louis, and everything smelled. And we saw Willie McGee's debut.
That's right. You mentioned that in a
David
previous
Green had
episode.
gone on the disabled list. That's what they called it back then.
Yeah.
I'm not being insensitive. And this weird alien-looking dude showed up, and he ran amok for a while in
Yep.
the National and eventually American leagues.
Speaking of artificial turf, and it's funny you bring that up because I remember as a kid, Bush watching games on WGN, in the '80s. Busch Stadium almost felt hot, and they would talk about it like it's 120 degrees on the turf. But also to tie it back to the Sox, I believe there was a time when the Sox actually did put artificial turf in Comiskey Park. Something I'm going to research.
Did they do one of the
about.
half-ass, like the infield was turf and the outfield was grass?
I wonder. I'm not even familiar with that. And then they switched it back because my entire life it was always a grass.
Tim McCarver Stadium in Memphis, when they
Yes.
were the AAA affiliate of the maybe they are again. I think they are. They are. They have a new fancy stadium. But when they were AAA affiliate of the Cardinals, had an AstroTurf infield, so their infielders could get used to playing on the turf, and it just looked ridiculous.
Wow. Well, so I googled Comiskey Park artificial turf. It's a Reddit thread. I dropped the link. It actually says when Comiskey Park had an AstroTurf infield and natural grass on the rest of the field from 1969 to 1975.
For 6 seasons.
7
seasons. Yeah, 69 through 75.
Wow. They also wore shorts. I mean, what a gimmicky.
Yeah. And, part of it with the White Sox was their inability to ever settle. Like, what were their colors? It's changed them all the time. Oh, we're red and white. Now we're red, white, and blue. Now we're black and white. Now we're black, white, and silver. No, we're back to red. We're just blue now. It's like, what?
Right. Well, and maybe you should have called yourself the White Sox to begin with. You didn't really.
Could you come up with a more boring nickname ever? Literally, just like you're sanitary hose, just the plainest.
And I know a listener out there can say, "Well, that's what the Cubs were at one point."
Yeah, the Cubs were smart enough to change it.
Exactly.
I mean, the Cubs were like, you know what? We'd rather be the Orphans. That's a better nickname than the
they
White
were for
Stockings.
A while. You're right.
And then we'll be the Whales.
Right. Well, and the Colts, I think, briefly, Cap Anson's Colts, before they settled on the Cubs. You're right. Like, they already went through the White Sox and gave it up, and then the American League team, is incepted, and then are so lacking in any sort of originality or creativity. They borrowed that name that the Cubs had ditched. Good point. Way to go.
But yeah, and so we heard it all our lives about, the Cubs are lovable losers and blah blah blah. Although it was in comparison to like the Cardinals. It wasn't in comparison to the White Sox, and there was a reason for that, because the White Sox fans didn't have a leg to stand on. Both teams forever had 2 World Series championships, and that was it. But the Cubs had been to a crapload, had won a lot more pennants. And then the playoffs expanded, and the Cubs actually went, and the White Sox just went once, and then kind of.
The White Sox went first, and we've talked about that. How we can talk about here, like it was very bitter when the Sox went in '83, but then until the Sox went and won the World Series, they had a pretty woeful modern playoff, and then they just had a woeful existence, postseason and otherwise. Because you're right. 83, 93, 2000, and then 2005 they win it all. So that was in their 4th playoff appearance in the modern era, the first series victory. And then how many playoffs, even with like COVID and stuff?
Well, they went back in 8. 8 was the year both teams made it the first time.
Blackout game.
Yep. And they both made it in the COVID year.
Yeah, and then
the Sox went back the next year. COVID year should have a big asterisk on it.
Well, but not for the Sox, because they were actually good.
Yeah, they were good. The Cubs got off to a good start and hung on for dear life. No. Yeah. But the only time they've gone back-to-back ever was 20 and 21. And they won a grand total of, 3 playoff games?
Yeah. Did they win 3?
Didn't they take the A's to the limit in their COVID series, and then Ricky Renteria shit his pants and had to get fired?
I think that was a 2 out of 3, though. Remember, they had like an expanded format. I don't think it was...
So
I think it's the only playoff game.
So they probably won 2 games. They won 1 against the Astros. Wasn't that the one with the asshole with the cane?
Well, yeah.
Like pointed it at the camera, and they won that game, and that was all they won.
Oh, yeah. I forgot all about that guy.
Now, I will say, it's very difficult for me to talk about White Sox games that the Cubs didn't play against them in, because I don't watch.
No.
Because I just don't give a shit. I think I watched 1 inning of the White Sox this year because on Twitter, or X, whatever it's going to be called as of today, somebody was making fun of like the White Sox would blown like a big lead. I watched like 5 minutes of a game. That's literally the only time I've tuned them in, and I will watch twice this week.
Yeah. Well, you know who would follow the Sox games all the time would be my father, whose hatred of them was so strong that he. I mean, I've told the story before. I told it at his wake, I believe, too, about how I was sent to my room when I walked in. He's sitting on the edge of his bed, listening to WMAQ, 2 outs in the ninth, and hey, Dad, what's going on? The Sox game. They're down a couple of runs with 2 outs in the ninth. This game's over. He just glares at me, and then Jerry Hairston swings. It's a long drive, and he literally sent me to my room. I brought the house down when I talked about it. I brought up that story at the wake, but he did. And if I could pivot a little bit to maybe provide a little bit of a personal historical context, I think we both have our own personal histories with how we became Cub fans and how we became to view Sox fans with such antipathy, which is more than sometimes they deserve, because their big beef is that nobody pays attention to it at all, which is, a separate thing. But for myself, I remember, of course, we've gone into our own history of how we've been Cubs fans, and my dad grew up in Our Lady of Lourdes, a couple miles from Wrigley, so it's easy for him to be one. But I remember myself as a kid, 1979, 1980, when I was sort of becoming, getting into the fold, and we were all Cubs fans. That was dictated, and so now I'm following the Cubs. And I remember at one point I was like learning, discovering, stumbling across the fact that there was this other team. Honestly, it was so they were so absent from our household, right? So I was like, oh, I said, Dad, did you know that there's another baseball team in Chicago, the White Sox? I mean, they sound pretty cool. No. we don't root for the White Sox.
None of that shit in this house.
And so I asked why, and I'm going to stop there right now and say I think nowadays it's very much geographical, and that's fine as it's evolved, right? Because, I grew up in the northwest suburbs, so a lot of our parents were people that migrated from the north or northwest side of the city. Same thing on the south side. You'd have exceptions, people from the south moved north, people from the north moved south. Some guy that maybe never went south of Roosevelt had an aunt, or some guy that just never lived in the south side. His aunt was a Sox fan, and that's why he was. So there are generalities, there are anomalies, and all that. And so I think for a large part that's true. But when I asked my dad why we don't root for the Sox, it wasn't geographic, because he was, for him it probably was because he was by the ballpark. But what he told me was that his dad was born in 1895. Okay, his dad actually was a fan of both teams. Okay, but it was the strike. It was not the strike. It was the World Series in 1919. The Black Sox scandal that turned him off. Now I don't know if that's was convenient or what, because I kind of thought about that a lot, and I think about it right. First of all, you talk about north side, south side. Yeah, that's maybe how it is now. But in the beginning, neither team was north side. Right, because the Sox today are at 35th and Shields, but the Sox, I researched this years ago. I looked it up and can't remember all of it. But the White Sox, from their inception, they didn't move into Comiskey until 1912, I think, something like that. But before then, they're somewhere around there, somewhere around Bridgeport, 31st Street, whatever. The Cubs, as we know, were West Side grounds. So when they're playing the World Series in 1906, I don't think anyone knows where West Side grounds is in relation to Chicago. But let me just say, first of all, that, the Cubs would have, I guess, sort of been a north side team in the fact that they were about a mile and a half north of where the Sox were, or a couple miles. But nobody really lived north of North Avenue or Division Chicago. A lot of farmland, a lot of German farmers out there, a lot of villages like Lakeview and Irving Park that would, around the turn of the century, would become incorporated by Chicago. But there was nothing out there in 1906, for example. 1906, when the teams met in the World Series, Cubs were at West Side guys. It's west, obviously, but it was south of Madison. It was Polk and Wolcott. So if anyone knows the Chicago area, it's like St. Ignatius High School, sort of like Rush Medical Center, a little bit west of UIC. Polk is just east of Damon Avenue, and then Wolcott's a little bit north of Roosevelt. So both teams were technically Southsiders, but the whole city of Chicago, grew, starting from downtown, everything grew south until, the 1920s is really when the north side blew up. Charlie Wiegand was, ahead of the curve when he built his ballpark up there. But 1906, you've got a World Series that probably to this day, no, it's probably not true unless the Giants and Yankees played Polo Grounds in Yankee Stadium, but it had to be a pretty short World Series because West Side grounds would only be about 2 miles north and 3 miles, about maybe 3.5 miles as the crow flies from wherever, from Comiskey Park, or not even Comiskey Park, wherever the Sox were playing in 1906. So
Well,
my
what
own,
year? What year did Troy O'Leary misplay the fly ball and kick the lantern over and start the fire?
what is it? Shortly after Charles Comiskey, no, 1902. No, well, 1870. The fire is 1871, and the Cubs come along in 1876. But yeah, if that's a serious question, the O'Leary barn is somewhere on the south,
Wow.
near south.
Troy O'Leary drove in the final run of the 2003 NLCS.
He did with a home run.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Who made the final out?
Paul Bacco.
Yes.
We talked about
Gabor.
that.
Fucking Gabor.
Gabor. So, long story short, too late. That's the context, I guess I'm saying here. For my answer is that I think at the time it was like this for my. I'm speculating that my grandpa, 1895, he's poor. Like eventually he was like without parents by the time he was like 17. Just regular Irish American early industrial era tragedy. Doesn't matter. He was a baseball fan. He once got punished for having a baseball glove, but they were getting by in the early industrial era. But he would have been 11 years old when the Cubs played the White Sox. He kind of lived down there before he settled. He was had moved up to the north side. But my guess is he had to have been a Cubs fan because the Cubs were fucking awesome in 06, 07, 08. Even though the Sox beat them, the Cubs were really the team.
The hitless wonders.
What's that?
Weren't the 06 Sox the hitless wonders?
They were the hitless wonders, right? They had a Donahue on their team, I believe, Jiggs Donahue.
Phil?
Probably Jiggs. That was his name. And it was, I think, maybe Donahue with an A.
Wait till we get to the list of guys who've played for both teams.
Can't wait.
There's a good one on there.
But anyway, so I don't know. Like I feel like whatever my grandfather's rooting interests were, when 1919, he probably was like, well, fuck those guys. My point is that I don't think you had to pick a side 110 years ago. I think that just evolved with the geography when people they did move further apart and maybe became more provincial. But in the beginning, they were just a few miles apart. So it was all like, it wasn't really just a few neighborhoods apart, really, if you look at a map. So, but after 1919, my grandpa cut them out, and that was a story that I had. I think in reality now it is geographic, but it also must have been pretty convenient for my grandpa, right? Because after the Tinkers and Everest to Chance thing kind of dies down, and the Cubs are still okay. The Sox are really good till they throw the series. The Cubs came back, right? It was Bill Veck's dad building that team that you talked about. They won pennants in 29, 30. And by then, my grandfather is living up in Lakeview. My dad is born in 33. The Cubs are awesome. They're the class of the league. And the Sox, because of what the stain that they left on the game of baseball, were basically condemned to like a Prometheus-like suffering. They set the mark that I don't know has ever been broken, that when they appeared in the World Series again in 1959, I don't think any franchise has ever gone 40 years without a playoff appearance. When the Cubs won the division in 84, they were 39 years.
They were the Detroit Lions of baseball, basically.
Yeah, except for the fact that they weren't even the worst team in the American League because the St. Louis Browns were actually worse. But over the context of the last 120 years, the Browns became the Orioles, right? All those shitty franchises that moved still now over the course of time passed up the White Sox. There's not they have the fewest pennants, correct? And so, we're not just punching down. Like, my allegiance is baked in. I'm not a front runner. If I was, I wouldn't be a Cubs fan either. But objectively, they are the most horrid franchise since the beginning of the American National League's squaring off.
Of any team that's over 100 years old, they're the least successful.
By pretty good margin.
The
by
Cubs,
any metric.
The Cubs and White Sox both have won 3 World Series. The Cubs have won the National League 17 times. The White Sox
That's
won
not fair.
it 6. We'll get to the other distinction. The Sox have won the American League 6 times. The Cubs have won 8 division titles. The Sox have won 6.
And that's the modern era too. So now you're like, at least you're even in the modern era where let's start over. The Cubs still have the edge.
The Cubs have been a wild card team 3 times. The Sox have been once. The Cubs have been to the playoffs 21 times. The Sox have been 11. The Cubs have been to the World Series, so this is what we think of as the pennant, 11 times, and the Sox have been 5 times.
More than
And then
twice.
even overall winning percentage, the Cubs winning percentage, the lovable losers is 513, the White Sox is 503. And so
Yeah.
for the longest time, what you heard, what the two things about the evolution of why the Cubs were more popular, and we talked about this. Like if you were a Cub fan, if we had a time machine, we went back to say the late 30s, and we told Cub fans that this is it. They're gonna have one lucky team during a World War that you might want to get ready for,
Mhm.
and although they probably, but if we're going to late 30s, they know what's coming.
Yes.
They're gonna be the laughing stock of baseball for the next whatever. No one would believe
Mhm.
you because they were the
Right.
Yankees. The Cubs were
They were
were the National League Yankees. Everybody's like fuck that.
they the Yankees passed them up in the 30s. The Cubs were the brand. Like they were the only team to have won. Well, they were the first team to win. They held the mark for the most wins in a season, the most wins over 2 seasons, the most wins over 3 seasons, 06, 07, 08. They lost all those World Series in the 20s, which like was starting to become annoying. But until the Yankees blew by everybody, the Cubs were the Cubs and Giants, but the Giants kept losing World Series. Like they were getting there. But the Cubs were in the team photo.
Yeah.
Top 5 brands in baseball. Cubs were probably second, third, or fourth. Even when the Yankees had ascended, and you could maybe give the Giants had more pennants, and that's it. The A's had, Connie Mack had 2 different eras, but like that's it. Those are top 4. I can pretty much cap it there. Yankees, Giants, Cubs, A's. Those are the teams that, like you said, 1940. Just do 1940.
Yeah.
For the last 50 years, just say, boom. Nobody would argue with you.
And then I didn't, as a baseball fan, I had heard of the Black Sox. I knew they, the guys had been banned for life from, And then about the time Field of Dreams and 8 Men Out come out, I remember, I was in late high school and college, I guess, when those two both came out, thinking how ridiculous it was that supposedly the Cubs had this curse because they kicked a bar owner's goat out of the stadium, but the White Sox didn't have a curse for literally throwing a World Series. It's like if the city of Chicago's baseball teams are cursed, it's those fuckers. It's not the Cubs. It's the White Sox fault.
Nobody ever talked about like a curse of that. It's fun. It's talk about Shoeless Joe, right? There's visages, phantasms, but an actual curse. It seems so obvious too. They did seem cursed for those 40 years. I mean, like they had Luke Appling and like I don't know who else would they have had. I don't know. I just like if you're in Chicago and you're a Sox fan, I think people felt sorry for you then. And that was,
And then the other thing you heard was, the Sox are really underrated because they had a lot of really good teams, but they just happened to be,
in the 50s.
Yankees. The Yankees basically
That's
swallowed
right.
up. It's like, well, that's a convenient thing to hide behind, right?
The
Yankees have been awesome, but how about the fact that what was stopping you guys from girding up your loins and beating them once in a while?
I will say the cruel part of me will just relish the fact that is the Sox golden era.
Yeah.
So how funny is it that their golden era is eclipsed by the greatest of the greatest franchises' golden eras? Because the Yankees, that's when they won their 5 consecutive World Series. That's never been repeated.
I guess, and if Sox fans are looking for sympathy, I mean, do a lot of them, I'm sure, are Bulls fans. Do they have a lot of sympathy for the Cleveland Cavaliers or the Riley Knicks or all those teams that don't have, none of those guys have a ring because the Jordan Bulls just kick their ass? So you don't get to pick when you don't get to pick when the other teams are good. You just have to get better than them or you have to shut up.
That's right. I have to throw this out just since we're on the historical aspect before we move on to more like personal, memorable, modern era things. Is that in preparation, I just pulled up the Baseball Reference franchise page, and it's probably, I'm sure that's not the only team for which this is true. And just to make sure I don't have egg on my face, I have to look up the Cubs. And no, it's not. But do you know who the White Sox winningest manager is? I'm not going to ask you who it is. His name is Jimmy Dykes. But what's funny, and you've heard that name, I'm sure. What's funny about it is that Jimmy Dykes is the winningest manager in White Sox history. His record is .899 and .940.
Is he also the losingest?
The 49 win percentage.
So,
He probably really
my mom was a stewardess in 1959 and 1960,
pretty cutting edge.
and yeah, and one flight, she flew the 1959 um, Chicago White Sox somewhere west.
Really?
I don't know where they were going. And
Not
she
for the World Series, though, right?
no, it was
During the
not.
season.
They weren't going out. Would they play the Dodgers? They weren't going out to play the
Yeah,
Dodgers.
yeah, it would have been good. Yeah.
This was during the regular season, but she, for the longest, and somewhere we still have it. She has a baseball autograph by a lot of the guys from the '59. Yeah, because I'm sure Mom was handing out hand jobs on the plane, and so she got a baseball.
Whoa!
What was that? No, of course she wouldn't have
Ted
done
Blazinski.
that.
Look at those biceps, man.
Yeah. And Al Lopez, what a nice man.
Oh, he was their manager. Yeah.
Yeah, so we had that piece of memorabilia. Dad allowed that in the house, but yeah, it wasn't exactly a prized possession. Like Jim and I couldn't go out and play catch with it, but we didn't have to. It wasn't like up on a shelf anywhere. It was just the thing we had.
Sure. Because your dad, can you speak a little bit about your dad? Did he have?
He didn't really care.
Right,
and this is you talked about being surprised that the White Sox were a thing as a kid. You didn't even know because your dad was so
we were so
just ignored
sheltered.
them to the point.
Well,
like
and also just one last thing about that though, the Cubs were on GN during the day. The Sox had lights, but they were also on channel 44, which was like VHF. So obviously, number one, my family's not going to make any effort to put them on, but they weren't as easy to find as the Cubs, which So anyway, sorry.
My first memory of them was the '83. Baseball is the name of the game. The Chicago White Sox way.
I don't remember that. I remember winning ugly.
I remember the song.
Wow.
I think that was the '83. What was that? Anyway,
what were the lyrics?
Baseball's the name of the game, the Chicago White Sox way. But and one of the stations in Rockford, I think, illegally picked up the games. I think that was a thing. I know they did. I know they stole Illinois basketball games for like a whole year before finally the line and I are like, wait a minute, we don't have a contract in Rockford.
nobody's blowing the whistle.
Channel 39 showing them anyway. So some of the games were on, and I remember I would just becoming like a big baseball fan. I was in Little League, and we always had the Cub games were always on the radio, and then whenever we could get them on TV, we watched them. And I remember, even though the Sox were good, they won the division by 20 games, right? Wasn't that the big deal?
They ran away with the division.
I remember just not giving a shit. Like I was like,
first week of September. Yeah.
I didn't have any friends who were Sox fans. I wasn't. Dad didn't care. We just kind of didn't care.
You knew they existed, though. You'd come into Chicago for Cubs games. You collected baseball cards, but they were just okay.
Yeah, they were just a thing. They might as well have been like the Brewers weren't a thing either. Milwaukee is easier to get. It's faster to get to County Stadium than it was to get to Wrigley. Mm-hmm. We didn't. We went up a couple of times with Dad and I. That was it. We didn't really care. It was just kind of like. Actually, I knew more about the Brewers because the Beloit Brewers. That would eventually work for the Snappers, but they were the Beloit Brewers.
Mm-hmm.
But so I go to college, and I go to Northern, and on my floor is a bunch of South suburban assholes who all became my friends. But they were all guys from went to Sandburg and Andrew and TF North and Lincoln Way, and they were all Sox fans. And this would have been 91, 92, the first year I was there. And so the Sox are getting good.
And they had a new ballpark.
Yeah.
Like, they were kind of rebranding.
Right. So I've been to U.S. Comiskey a bunch of times because we would just go in. And then one of my best friend in college was a big Sox fan. And I learned a lot. It's that thing, I knew a lot about the Sox then because I had to have ammo when they were giving me shit about the Cubs. I had to be able to give them shit right back. And I've talked about the fact that for that whole first year, I made fun of this outfielder they had, who was just this wild, crazy guy with Jerry curl, and just couldn't believe, look at this asshole. And then the spring training the next year, the Cubs traded for him, and he had to become my favorite player because now I had to defend Sammy Sosa to the death, and I still will. But that's how I became. The only time once I left college, it very slowly drifted away, and I could give a shit about the Sox again. I mean, I don't not watch them because it's some. I'm just kind of like no, I don't care.
Well, and that's what they seem to. It seems to frustrate the fan base in general. Is that they're so not on people's radar, even when they do good things, like the 2005. Like, all the times they get omitted and
Yeah,
stuff. Like
like the most
it's like
forgettable.
worse. It's worse than being hated. I think if there's a Sox fan listening, it's probably more annoyed by you than by me.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons for that is they're like they they blew through the playoffs too easily.
I know.
Like they
I
have
know.
these supposed big moments, like Scott Podsednik's home run, but
Yeah.
they never faced
Canerco's.
the 2016 Cubs gave us all heart attacks.
Every series they look
Could
in
have
the abyss
blown
at least once.
all three series, and then they get to the World Series, and they just
Yeah.
they immediately get rid of any margin for error. It's
The
like,
only
nope, we got to win
drama
them
with
all now. We got to win three in a row.
the only drama with the Sox that run was when they were this close to going down 2-love against the Angels when Brzezinski stole first base.
Yeah, when he cheated.
That's it. That was early in the season, or early in the series. I mean,
So I wonder if that's part of it. Like if you're a Sox fan, obviously you have a million like memorable moments from those playoffs. But if you're a
sure.
casual baseball fan, the '05 White Sox just came and went. And then they played the Astros when the Astros weren't really
Right.
nobody gave a shit about the Astros. They weren't even hateable back then. It was just like, oh yeah, that's the team with the, Chip Carey's favorite players on it, and
Right. Yeah.
and they never win. So,
Yeah. That was that the Astros' first World Series, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. They'd never been.
Phil
And that's
Garner.
the only one, isn't it? And that was their only one as a National League team.
Yes.
I just remember being annoyed at Houston for not putting up a better fight.
Yeah.
Clemens. They beat Roger Clemens to win a World Series. How about that?
That's not as big as beating him when he's got his when he's putting his jerseys in a trunk after every half
Yeah.
inning so he can sell them because he's
Yeah.
going to win his 300th game. When Eric
That's
Carroll's is
right.
like, "Fuck you." Poor
Right.
Aesop didn't scramble his brains so that we could lose.
Right.
So yeah, so as part of this this exercise, I looked up. I was trying to jog my memory of some of the great Cubs White Sox games, and
Yeah.
I mean, there's always been like a weird energy around these games, right?
Well, let's put it in the context too, because prior to 1997, these games didn't exist. Except some of us remember, like I went to a game when the strike was going on in '81, and then it was over, and that Mayor Jane Byrne there was a game at Comiskey, and we went to the game at Wrigley, and then in 1985 they would have the exhibition, and I remember because I was a dumb kid, I would get so worked up over the annual Cubs Sox game, and then, but
Cubs never
since
won.
'97, right? This time it counts, beginning of '97.
It's funny. I learned stuff that I didn't. So from 1903 to 1942, there was this thing called the City Series, and they played. This is great. So the first year they played it, 1903, they played usually they played best of 7, best of 5. They played a best of 15, and the Cubs immediately roared out to a 6-3 lead, and then in typical Cub fashion, after 14 games, it was tied at 7. However, getting heckled here
What time of year is that?
right after the
Curious
season.
about.
Right after the season, and so
After
they
the-
play these
'cause I
14
thought
games, and now the 15th game is supposed to happen on October 15th, but all the players' contracts had expired, and neither team would play,
Oh.
so they tied. So then they shortened it.
So, wait, okay, hold on. That's crazy. I'd never heard this before. My first thought was this had to be a preseason thing, and it's basically ostensibly a training camp thing or
No, it's
whatever.
opposite. It's a postseason cash grab.
It's a way for the owners to fucking capitalize on other local citizens in a
Weather's still
two-team
nice.
town.
If
It's
the
a
teams
two-team
aren't
town.
if the teams aren't in the World
Yeah,
Series, you might as well
right.
play each other.
Right. You have two professional teams in the same city. Wow. Okay.
So they did that. The Sox ended up winning that.
I'm sure there was no players' booty either, right?
So-
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. So apparently it wasn't played every year between 03 and 42 because they only played 25 times. The Sox won
Probably
18
some
of them.
Warriors.
The
Okay.
Sox were 18-6-1. So then the thing we remember was the Windy City Classic, which became the
Oh,
Crosstown
thanks.
Classic.
Thanks for doing the research.
That came back in
Yeah.
1985.
85.
They
Yeah.
played for 10 years, but they played 11 games because in the last year, 95, they played a home and away. They played each
Oh,
park.
that
How
was
many
the
of those
first
games
year.
do you think the Cubs won out of those 12?
I felt like they were hardly keeping score because one game ended in tie. Steve Vines played every position. Yeah, so 12, 13 games. Cubs won 5.
They didn't win any.
They never won
They
one.
were
Oh,
0-10,
I
0-10
remember
and
that.
2.
It was the '94 game that ended the tie, right? The Dave Otto, Michael Jordan game.
Yeah, they were 0-10
The
and
Cubs
2.
never won. See, I'll just tell you, the first, like I said, I was a dumb kid that was way more into it than I should have been because I was buying into the hype. The first one was '85, right? So put it in context.
Yeah.
It's a stupid exhibition game 3 weeks into the season when both teams have an early season break. It's fucking cold out. And I'm like the buddies that I went to junior high with that were Sox fans, like I just like blood loss. They're my friends, but like it's all I could think about is a stupid exhibition game. And it was at Comiskey, and the Cubs were coming off their division. The Sox were a year removed from theirs, and young future Cubs pitching coach Jim Hickey. Because eventually the games would quickly evolve. It was like an all-star game, right? Starters would start, and then it was like your minor leaguers would be called up for. Jim Hickey, he hit Gary Matthews on the wrist, and Matthews had to come out. I was just being pissed that this young, wild guy can't even throw a strike, and he's hurting Sarge. And the Sox won. And you're right. I'm not going to re-forget it, but now that you mention it, that was a thing. That this stupid just like with the real life, the regular season games where it counts. Like I grew tired of that exhibition season after a few years, exhibition series after a few years.
Right, and everybody
Probably
did.
because the Cubs didn't perform well.
So it goes away in '95, but then interleague comes in '97. So you really didn't.
Yeah.
You really didn't need it anymore. So since interleague started, the Sox hold the series lead 73-65.
Okay.
The Crosstown Cup, the prestigious Crosstown Cup, has been going on
The
since
BP?
2010. For the first 3
That's a-
years, it was the BP Cup. Then from 2013 to 2018, there was no sponsor. That's when it's the DeCipio Payday Loans Cup. Those were those years.
I remember.
And then 2019 to now, it's the Wintrust Cup.
Oh, sure. Okay.
The both teams have won it. The longest streak any team has won has been 4 years. The Sox retained the cup from 2009 to 2012, and the Cubs had it from 2017 to 2020. That's the longest anybody has ever held it. And it's funny, I remember the 2017 Cubs. So here they are. They won the World Series the year before, and they win whatever game they clinch the cup, and this thing gets brought out, and there is somewhere on the internet, I gotta find it. There is this picture of the Cubs with this cheap ass trophy standing on the mountain. None of them could look more like who gives a shit. It's great. They're just like, we have to pose with this thing? We won the real one. It's right over there.
Right.
No, sorry.
In the display case. Here, I'll walk you over there in our new clubhouse.
But so the very first game was played on June 19th, the first game for real, other than the World Series in '06, was played on June 16th, 1997. And the only thing I remember it for were the uniforms.
Which one?
The very first interleague game
Yes.
between the two teams.
Well,
at
I'm gonna-
Comiskey.
I have to share a quick anecdote because I talked about this a couple weeks ago. This remains probably my most Chicago day ever. But the morning of the first ever Cubs game, buddy of mine and me went down to the city to celebrate in Grant Park with the Bulls, title number 5. And then after that, I remember we went to get a burger at the Billy Goat, and I'd never been to the Billy Goat before at that point, so check that box. Down underneath Michigan Avenue, and then we took the Red Line up to 35th Street for a weekday afternoon game at Comiskey Park. And Brian McRae let off with like a triple down the line. This is Brian McRae's one shitty year, but one nice thing, he got the Cubs off to the right start in '97 in that game. But yeah, it was an afternoon game, and the uniforms though, I do remember that the Cubs had like the whale. Was it the whale? No. But they were blue.
1911.
Maybe,
They were solid
Okay.
blue. Everything was kind of like their awful City Connect uniforms now, except without no baby blue on them anywhere.
true.
Just
Yeah.
a lot of blue.
Right.
And then the Sox, they wore their 1906 jerseys.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
I'm sure that was a coincidence.
Right. At least it was in 1919. But yeah, the Cubs, and that's 97. If you want to hear all the agony and the agony of that season, we have a whole episode dedicated to that
Yes.
Cubs team. It was a miserable season. So one of the few bright spots is that the Cubs did play in the first ever real regular season Cubs Sox.
And so then the next year was the first time they had a series at Wrigley.
Yeah,
And for a while there, in 1998, every Friday was Brant Brown walk-off home run day. And this
including one
was
of the
one of
Sox.
them. He hit a 12th inning home run to win the game.
Yeah,
And I just listened to a recording of it, and Hawk Harrelson was calling it. And he didn't give it the silent treatment, but not real excited, which as you could expect.
sure. Yeah, we when we went over the '98 Cubs fun season, we treated that weekend. Half my buddies got thrown out of the bleachers. I managed to stay in for the entirety of that game. But one of the things that happened in that game that was kind of hilarious was the Sox could have won the game like in the eighth or whatever, and hit a ball that, like, I don't know, it was one of those like first and second and left center gap. It was a total ground rule, a literal ground rule, Wrigley Field ground rule, Ivy double.
Yeah, it went into. Did they go in the Ivy? Didn't one ball go into like a drainage thing?
I don't know, maybe, yeah. I don't know if it was the same thing. I thought it was an Ivy, but
It
was
was
like
something weird.
it was very
Weirder
suspicious.
than normal.
Right, where the normal, not a typical ball gets in the Ivy. So.
And then I didn't realize this until today. Because I remember going to this game, but I didn't remember that it was the second one ever at Wrigley. The next day, I went, and I got to see Jose Hernandez and Derek White, the great Derek White, both homer off of future Cub, Stevie Iyer. Scott Ayer.
Oh, God, I hated Scott Ayer.
Sammy
God,
also homered, and the Cubs won 7-6. I was glad watching the thing today. I was glad that I was at the game and not watching it on TV because the game was on Fox, and the announcers were the very impartial John Rooney and Jeff Torborg. Can you imagine two duller people to have doing the game than those two?
Jeff Torborg, former White Sox manager.
Jeff Torborg would later screw the Cubs by getting himself fired in 2003. And then Jack McKeon took over, and the Marlins took off like a shot. If Torborg just keeps them, mediocre, they don't go to the playoffs, and the Cubs.
Interestingly, Torborg was also the Sox manager that then general manager Larry Hines, who hired Torborg as his first hire, threw overboard in favor of Gene Lamont, who was, no offense to the pride of
Kirkland, Illinois.
I thought it was Canelan.
Kirkland, Illinois is Gene Lamont.
Because there's a picture in the Crystal Pistol. There was back in the day. One of those times that we were there, I've told stories of the Pistol and DeKalb, Andy, right? Some of the, Mayor Spiro would be the first fella in the bar on Friday and the last guy to leave. And, Don Clark Metz did a fundraiser, and of course he's going to hang out there, cook dinner for Sidney Crawford, DeKalb's finest. And yes, one time, how close is Kirkland to DeKalb? It seems like it was really
not
close.
Very far.
But Gene Lamont had dinner in the
15 miles,
Pistol. Yeah, so Michael Mazzarelli, our owner, took a picture. A moment of silence for Michael, but took a picture of Gene Lamont that was on the wall of the Pistol for a while.
Just take Annie Glidden south, and then turn right, and you go to Kirkland.
Okay,
right,
yeah. So, but anyway, Larry Hines threw Torborg overboard for Gene Lamont and did get a division out of it, and then would repeat the issue when he threw his first hire for the Cubs, Jim Lefevre, overboard for Tom Trebelhorn. So there's a Cubs Sox time. We both had a general manager promotion.
June 13th, 1999, a game beset by rain delays, and the Cubs season was already starting to circle the drain, and Mike Caruso.
Yeah, we talked about it.
Failed.
I'm not going to talk
White
about
Sox
it again.
Shortstop hit a home run.
Yeah. In the basket. Probably the only homer of the year, too. And back then, so you're already up to 99. So 97, there's just one series because they were still getting this thing piloted off the ground, this whole interleague thing. 98, there was only one series, which is at Wrigley, and then beginning in 99, it was two.
Right.
And then
that's Jerry Reinsdorf.
Yeah.
It's all
Right.
Jerry.
Yep.
Nobody needed 6 of those games.
Because
And
the
we kind
'97
of
White
talked about it, like the weird atmosphere. Well, so at that '98 game, I distinctly remember seeing a fight between two drunken White Sox fans, females, and it was one of those fights where it starts. They're not in the same row, so one person has the high ground and is
right.
swinging down on the one below, and everybody's cheering because it's two women
Right.
fighting. And it's like, oh, this is great. And then I've told the story about it. '03, I was at U.S. Comiscular, and I got in a fight with a Cub fan
Yep.
because he was. I tried to find it on the play-by-play. In my mind, it's one of those things. I remember when I remembered the Willie Wilson and Deion Sanders triples that didn't
Right.
happen.
Mandela effect. Yeah. Mandela effect.
I remembered like Troy O'Leary. I guess Troy O'Leary did hit a home run in that game. That's about Spinner I remembered. And the Cubs had a lead, and they ended up blowing it. But they were up. And this Cub fan is a super drunk Cub fan. We're not even in the. We're down on the concourse. We went to get more beer. We're down on the concourse, and he's screaming and yelling. And I was embarrassed for just how overly excited the guy was for like a 5th inning home run,
Right.
whatever it was. And I basically told him to calm down. And he got pissed and he turned. And I didn't have any Cub stuff on. I didn't have it, So he just assumed I was a Sox fan. And he took a wild swing at me. And before I could do anything, the 2 Sox security guards had him like gone. Like they grabbed him and they were gone. And my friend Neil and I looked at each other like, did that just happen? And they just left us there because they knew we didn't do anything.
Right. They probably had their eye on that clown.
Yeah. But
Wait for him.
the Sox won both of those games, the first 2 games, on walk-offs.
I kind of remember that.
And then the Cubs won the Sunday game.
It was a close game, that Sunday game. I want to say, like, would Bartolo Colon have been on the '03 White Sox? I feel like he was in that series, but they were frustratingly challenging games. The Sox weren't bad in '03, and the Cubs, of course, would need every game they could get. So, yeah, I remember that. That's very frustrating.
June 28th, 2002. Do you remember this game?
Oh, was
Were you
this
there?
the Friday game? Was
Yeah.
this the Friday game in Comiskey? Yeah, I talked about it.
Okay.
Go back to 2002, folks. I guarantee you there's a 10-minute diatribe. We don't want to take up too much. So just know that is the date that I swore to myself, and I lived up to it, that I will never, ever go to U.S. I'll never go watch a Cubs Sox game at Sox Park because
I'm never going back to a Cubs Sox game.
we showed up late, but the Cubs were kicking ass. Corey Patterson hit a 3-run homer. They were up 8-0. And I was sitting up way in the upper deck, right next to the sun. And what annoyed me, similar to your story about idiot Cub fans, is that Kerry Woods walked in the ballpark, and I remember just seeing Cub fans in their seats just like goofing around. Like, you're not even watching the game.
Yeah.
He's pissing it away, you clowns. And like, you're not even gonna know what's gonna happen. When like, it was breathtaking how quickly the Cubs came back. I think Konerko hit the go-ahead homer like in the 6th inning or something. The lead was erased breathtakingly fast, and I was angry and intoxicated. I remember like walking out of the ballpark, and Cubs sucked that year anyway. The Sox weren't going anywhere, and I was just like, big deal, you beat the Cubs. But yeah, just terrible day at the park for me. So yeah, that's the date you said, June 19th, 2002.
June 28th, 2002.
28th. Wow.
Yeah, the Cubs were up 8-0 and lost 13-9.
Yeah, it's brutal. Farnsworth sucked in that game.
It's very
too.
reminiscent of a couple of years ago when they gave Jake the 7-0 lead in Milwaukee, and
that
lead was
was
gone before the 2nd inning was over.
Same thing.
And lost
Yeah,
14-7.
That was the last gasp of the World Series era, or the last gasp of Jake Arrieta's Cub career. Whatever. I think even for the franchise, it was sort of the last gasp.
So then we go ahead 4 years later, May 20th, 2006.
Yeah. We've broken it down punch by punch, I believe.
One of the dumbest Cubs of all time and the biggest asshole in White Sox history, which is a pretty. I mean, there's nobody is going to challenge that AJ is the worst.
Sure.
But they've got quite a list. Got in a fist fight. Actually, only one of them got in a fist fight.
Right.
Only Barrett threw any punches.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a Rich Hill was on the mound, I believe.
Still pitching. Who knew? Who would have known? 17 years later.
Still pitching. So, and then I have to mention, I know you wrote that one down, but I'm going to come through that. Brzezinski factored into the Wrigley game in '06, and I talked about that when we covered the '06 season, and it's actually the impetus for my current, past and current Twitter avatar. My Twitter profile pic. It was my profile pic before Theo. It was my first Twitter profile pic, and then I broke it back out a couple years ago because I'm not going to wear that when the Theo is here because they're awesome. But it was the moment that Ryan Dempster, shitbag that he is, gave up with a 2-out, lead-changing, go-ahead ninth-inning home run to Brzezinski in the right field that snatched a defeat from the jaws of victory. And we were already so down in that Cubs team. That was Dusty's last year. We were just dying for everybody did get shipped out after that season, including Dennis Fitzsimmons and Andy MacPhail. But we had our Dominic's grocery bags ready. And we threw them on, the brown paper bags.
Yeah, I mean, we don't need to go into great detail with the AJ Michael Barrett thing because it's been done to death. Worst part about it was it got AJ on the All-Star team because they did that stupid punch AJ. Remember when they used to vote in the extra man and he got voted in because it was so clever?
Pretty clever, actually. As a marketing guy, you must be able to appreciate that. Well, and that was the year after AJ. The Sox were defending World Series champions that year, so it was a real tough time to be a Cubs fan. Let's be right. I was writing that. I remember writing screeds. I just was so sick of Tribune ownership, and it was things did change for the Cubs after that year. I don't know if the Sox winning it all in '05 had anything to do with it, but by the end of that year, MacPhail was fired. Within a couple of years, they sold the team to Sam Zell. Finally.
Lou came the next year.
That's true. Right, because Sam Zell wanted to build, artificially inflate the fans. They hired Soriano.
Yep.
You got any of those Cubs Sox games from '07 where Soriano seemed to keep homering against them? Or?
Yeah, well, I have in here that on June 24th, the Cubs swept at Comiskey, the first time they'd done that, and they won the season series 5-1. And that should have been I don't know, kind of a wake-up call for the White Sox that their World Series shit was over.
Yeah.
As a very mediocre, it was a playoff team, but it was a very mediocre Cub team, and they were smacking the White Sox around.
That's very satisfying to look at in retrospect because the Cubs also barely made the playoffs. So if you're a Sox fan, you're like, damn it, the Cubs put a nail in our coffin, and then also we could have just won 2 of those games. Maybe the Cubs don't make the playoffs. Of course, the Cubs didn't do jack shit in the playoffs anyway. But
they barely got in. They didn't get in the second to last day thanks to our old friend Greg Maddux.
That's right.
Beating the Brewers. One of my favorite games of all time, Sox or not, June 20th, 2008, Derek Lee and Aramis Ramirez hit back-to-back home runs in the 7th to tie the game, and then Aramis in the 9th hit a home run off Scott Linebrink.
Wow.
Walk-off home run for the Cubs.
That's a pull.
I remember the back-to-back home runs came out, as they would, but they came out of nowhere. You're watching the game thinking, shit. They were down 3-1. And I don't know if they were on consecutive pitches, but it happened fast. And all of a sudden, it was tied. And it was nice to see that shit happen to them.
I don't remember that. And you know what? You mentioned '08. That's the 1 year since the first time in 102 years that both teams went to the postseason. Yep. So they're both good teams, presumably. We put the nail in their coffin in '07 somewhat, but they did bounce back. Ozzie, and I hated that barking maniac, but I will say in deference to the White Sox that guy, he got more out of what he had there than probably any manager they've had. It was kind of annoying. They were decent teams around then.
A couple of things happened in 2010. On June 13th, I remember this because I was this was a Sunday night game at Wrigley. And I had driven to Colorado Springs, and I had to get back to the hotel to see if Theodore Roosevelt Lilly was going to finish off his no-hitter. And do you remember who broke it up to lead off? A former Cub broke it off to lead off the 9th.
Oh my God, I had completely forgotten about.
Let's just say that before the game, he was rolling his balls down the foul lines.
I don't remember that Juan Pierre played for the fucking White Sox.
For 2 years, he played for the White Sox after he left the Cubs.
After the Cubs.
Juan Pierre broke up the no-hitter.
This is the point in the contest where, like, boy, my memory gets worse the more recent we come, because that would, you'd think that would stick in my craw, because I hate him on Pierre.
Um, couple of years.
Wow.
Oh no, 2 weeks later, um, more shit happened in the dugout than on the field. Carlos Zambrano had been
Nope.
staked to a 3-0 lead going into the top of the first, and it was tied by the bottom of the first. And
Is
he
this the
got
Milton
mad at
Bradley
Derek
story?
Lee for a play that he
Oh,
thought Lee should make, and they got in a fight, not an actual swinging. But Lou had to send his pitcher to the clubhouse and put a different pitcher in.
I do remember that.
Not only that, Carlos would get suspended for that, and when he came back, he was in the bullpen. Remember
So
that?
I love Carlos, but, like, damn, bro, it's hard to defend you. I know you're a hothead and it makes you funny sometimes. Throwing up your teammates isn't that cool. Although I've been guilty of it, obviously. But man, showing up Derek Lee,
Yeah, Derek Lee
that's
of
not
all
a good
people to
look.
get in a fight with.
That's not a good look.
Um, yeah,
Well,
we had
you
too
talk
much.
about that. That's one dugout altercation. I don't know if you have another dugout altercation.
Yeah, they
that
did it the very
happened
next
in
year.
or the year
Um,
before.
oh yeah, because 10 would have been the end of Lou. 10 was the year
Yeah,
Lou said
in
fucking went home.
'09 was when they got Bradley because they were too damn right-handed,
Yeah.
supposedly, after '08. So, yeah, so there was that. So here's another funny thing. You might appreciate this. Did you notice that at some point the White Sox started playing their Friday games in the afternoon? Because that obviously you noticed that, because, like, it was always a Friday. Who does that besides the Cubs, except the Sox?
Oh, you mean the Cub games on Fridays? Yeah,
Comiskey.
they had to do it because of there were so many fights.
There's one in particular that made the news, and it involved a local sports radio guy.
Oh, was it Bill Simonson?
Yeah. So I remember a few years later, I was up in Michigan, a few years after he left Chicago, because he was like he was Lou Canales. They had the big afternoon show, and he was an out-of-town guy, which is not, you could succeed in this town, not being from Chicago, obviously. He was a little bit of a tryhard, I remember. And he had a big, overly, oh, Bill, I'm the huge, or Bill Simonson. And I just remember, like, a few years later, he turned up, like, on Grand Rapids when I was on that side. But he was, like, the guy in the afternoon AM 1000, and he got his ass kicked on the Friday night, like a Cubs Sox game, either in 99 or 2000 or something like that.
Yeah.
So, and I think there were a lot of fights, but I think that one got a lot of attention because he was a high profile. He probably had it coming because he was a big mouth on the air, and probably, I think, he had some, off the field proclivities that may have led to it. And it was, like, in the news, he had a black eye, there's a picture of him or whatever. So within a couple of years, I think beginning of that 2002 game, Uncle Jerry was just like, I don't know, man, I'm paying too much in liability insurance or something, but he started putting those games on Friday.
Yeah, I remember it might even been the game we just talked about in 10, the night game. Like, the Cubs and White Sox did not want a Sunday night game because they didn't want to have they didn't want to have any night games. And ESPN's like, no, you're going to have to figure it out because we want,
right.
Now they don't care. Those games, the games this week, obviously, are both at night. So
Weeknight, right?
Yeah.
Are they playing this weekend?
Instead of weekends.
Yeah, they still play. Yeah, it was a Friday. I think it was more of a Friday. It wasn't night games in general so much as.
Well, they didn't play night games forever because of that. Saturday and Sunday, nobody notices to play those during the day.
Right, but, like, they
had to move the Friday games to afternoon. Like that game in '08 where you were sitting up with the sun. That was a Friday.
Yeah.
And that's why. That would have been a night game otherwise.
But it wasn't.
Right.
So, yeah, the Sox had to follow suit with the Cubs with the tradition of a Friday game just for those games. Jerry wants to collect his money. He doesn't want to pay too much in liability insurance, maybe.
I'm sure he will remember this game well in an emotional moment on May 18th, 2012.
I know it.
Middle of an inning. Manager Jamie Quirk comes out because Dale, I think, had gotten tossed.
Funny. Perfect.
Calls Kerry Wood to come to the mound.
That's right.
For the last time. Kerry strikes out the great Diane Viciedo
I could have
And
told you
then
that.
goes to the dugout and hugs Tony Campana right in front of the dugout. It was very. No, wait, that was his little son. That's right. He hugged his son on the way off. And that was it. We never saw Kerry again. He immediately started his personal services contract, which Dan Bernstein told us meant that he would immediately be an announcer for the Cubs. And now, 11
Oh,
years later, he has still never done it because that was bullshit. But
yeah, right.
it was the end of Kerry.
That was a nice moment. I
It
remember
was.
watching that one. I was at my dad's house. It was another Friday afternoon. You know, the war torn, abbreviated career of Kerry Wood that, much like Gale Sayers, had like these incredible meteoric like moments of just like
I mean, it
excellence.
was. It the second. That was Kerry's third act with the Cubs. That wasn't even the second act. That was the third act.
So can we retrace it? So
Well,
first act,
was starting pitcher.
he gets traded
star.
to Cleveland. He built. They allowed him to build his.
Well,
depth
no, I mean,
that he
so I divide it this way. So he obviously comes up as this hotshot rookie, and strikes out 20, and then all this promise, and then keeps blowing his arm out. But he's amazing in the 2003 playoffs.
Yep.
And then he's hurt
leads
again
him
all
to
the time.
Leads him to
And
the
then
brink of a pennant.
before the '07 season, he's going to retire. His arm's fucked, and he tells the Cubs he's going to retire. But his story was he decided he played catch the day he was going to go in, and his arm felt good. And he said, "Well, I'm not going to retire yet." So they put him in the bullpen, and he was the setup guy in '07, right? And then he was the closer in '08. Was an all-star closer. Then he gets traded to the Indians. Or, he doesn't get traded. He doesn't get re-signed.
He's signed.
Hendry allows him.
make
Hendry's like, just go find a job somewhere else. We need a real closer.
Yeah.
What, his arm won't fall off. Goes to the Indians. Pitches in the playoffs for the Yankees. And pitches really well for the Yankees.
He got traded down the stretch in '09. Okay.
And then, or whatever year that was. Must have been 10, because he wasn't on their World Series team.
Right.
But he was in the playoffs. He pitched well in the playoffs. I remember being literally nervous for him in the playoffs because I didn't want to see Kerry.
Yeah, I got you. Right.
But then Theo takes over, and one of the things he says is, "We're not doing any of this sentimental stuff. I mean, we're rebuilding." And then at the Cub convention that year, they announced they've signed Kerry Wood.
Right.
It's like, I thought you were doing this, Teddy. And then he really had nothing left. He was bad. No. He was hurt. He was bad.
That's the third act. The first was this hot shot pitcher.
Starter.
Then, like this
then
really
the transition reliever. Then he comes back.
He did. So he was really just a nominal Cub in that third act in 2012.
Right, but it was nice. I mean, it was the fact that he got 2 productive years as a reliever for them was a big deal because he was a really good reliever.
They could have gone to the World Series if Brian Dempster wasn't such a fuckhead and they're like, everybody could hit. He was their closer in '08. I was at his comeback in '07. I remember being really annoyed because it was a Sunday night game against the Mets, and I actually saw a major league pitcher record his 300th victory, and it was Tom Glavine for the Mets.
Oh, yeah.
But I was more excited about the fact that Kerry Wood was making his first ever appearance as a reliever.
Yeah. I remember how excited Al Yellen was to see the Glavine. Yeah, history. Want to see history? Fuck you. Nobody wants to see that. Tom Glavine's a prick, and the Mets suck, and we don't need to see that. He can go do that somewhere else. 2013, Cubs are still bad, but Travis Wood hits a grand slam. The Cubs win 8-3.
Who hit the grand slam?
Travis Wood.
He hit a grand slam
against the White Sox in a game he won 8-3.
I just want to throw back a random memory of like 1999 when I think Todd Walker got a Sunday night game-ending walk-off bases loaded walk against Zero. What was that Asian pitcher for the Sox?
Yeah.
I believe he walked Todd Walker with the bases loaded like in '99 or not '99, not that far back, but yeah.
I can't think of his name. I keep thinking of Todd Iguchi, but that was the second baseman. I can't think of the pitcher. Who cares? Did you know this? I didn't remember this. I remember that Aroldis Chapman made his Cub debut against the White Sox.
Yes, I do remember that. I was on vacation.
All of his pitches 100 miles an hour, and the fans shit their pants. Michigan. Never seen it before, even though Kyle Farnsworth used to do it on occasion. Yeah, now we're getting into who gets it. I mean, I didn't write the date down, but one of my favorite things would be the Wilson Contreras bat flip in the COVID year, where he threw it like he crushed a ball, and he threw the bat straight up in the air, and it's still hovering somewhere. Um,
Uh,
Eloy hit a game-altering home run off of Pedro Strop in 2019. And then I didn't know this happened. I saw the guy listed this as one of the games in 21. And I'm like, why do I not remember this? Well, I know I remember this. Wasn't watching that shit. It was August 27th. The Cubs had traded away everybody. I'm not going to watch this. The White Sox won 17-13, the highest scoring game in Cub White Sox history.
yeah, no recollection there. You say it was after the
After the
rest of the
sell-off.
parts were traded off. Yeah,
Yeah,
sell off.
and
Yeah.
nobody was paying attention anymore.
I have another frustrating memory. I shouldn't bring it up because it's painful, but the year the Cubs missed the playoffs when Craig Kimbrell all of a sudden started throwing Bob Scanlon straight as an arrow fastballs
Yep.
down the stretch. But they lost, like, they played the Sox in September that year, and, like, that was around the time that Giolito started emerging, and he pinned him down one game. You know, when you miss the playoffs by a game or two, you think back to some of those, but that was when that Sox team was getting good around the time the Cubs team was sundowning, and we were all kind of thinking, "Whoa!" There were like shades of that team that kind of reminded us, that, honestly, objectively, of the Cubs' early ascension.
Well, it's funny, and the current Sox should be a cautionary tale for all these fans who think that the Cubs rebuild. Once all these prospects get ready, whoa, we're going to be good. We got spoiled. The 2016 Cubs, 15, 16, 17 Cubs. Everything went right. It's like all those prospects were good. Even the guy they didn't draft Javi, but all of a sudden Javi comes up and Joe with the famous, just don't mess with him. I'll handle Javi, and he turns into a star. And Bryant was better than advertised, and on and on and on. Everything worked, and they win. The White Sox, I mean, you could make a case. You can't now because of the results, but their rebuild actually went better than the Cubs because they had more to trade. Like the Cubs. Theo didn't have anybody to trade when he got. They traded Ryan Dempster. He got Kyle Hendricks, which was great, but nobody's giving up shit for Kyle. And it took Ryan turning down they would have had Randall Delgado instead. Or they did a trade.
We did a trade.
But the White Sox, for all they got Giolito, and they got they traded Sale, and they got Yohan Moncada and Kopech, and they got Eloy and Dylan Cease from the Cubs and all that stuff. And
right.
I mean, you could look at it and say Han did a hell of a job, and he did, and it hasn't turned to anything. And it's over. How much failed. They're going to have to do it again.
It's over. How much stock do you put into the fact that by hiring an octogenarian
it didn't help.
It didn't help. But there are people that are, I shouldn't give them any credit. I'm not going to name them by name, but they're pointing out, La Russa was 40 games over 500 with this team, blah blah blah. I'm like, because they're really bad now.
Yeah, but
he had the same team.
Well, they were bad. He managed a team last year and they were bad. They're worse now. And honestly, I think the real reason is they traded the heart of their team when they traded Nick Madrigal to the Cubs. I mean, how are you supposed to get on? How are you supposed to survive that? Maybe they could get him back.
They could still right that wrong.
The Cubs could just leave him there, although he missed today's game in Iowa with general body fatigue, which that's a general I don't remember.
But true. They could, because they're at Comiskey, right? So they're bringing him to Comiskey this week.
Just send him to the home clubhouse. So you can have him. I mean, do you still have his little doll uniform that he used to wear? Just give that to him. I mean, to have the bat boy hand him his jersey. It'll be fine. No, but I say that as a way that you can do everything right in these rebuilds, and it doesn't mean they're going to work. Because Han did a lot right, and it didn't work. And,
you're right.
Yeah, because there was a time as a Cub fan when you were watching them put that team together, like, oh, shit. They're going to be good. And they really weren't. Maybe the pandemic year really screwed them. I don't know. Maybe that was a year when they were going to get rolling and they didn't. And then the next year they were good. That 1 year good year they had was 21, but they ran into the Astros who were better, so they get bounced out of the playoffs, and that seems to be it, which is just too bad.
And that was a La Russa team, so yeah, he couldn't have gotten away that much.
Yeah, he got in the playoffs. Yeah. Okay, so I think this can't be the whole list, but it goes back to 1973, and these are the trades that the Cubs and White Sox have made with each other.
Does it start with Ron Santo or Steve Stone or something?
It does. I didn't realize. Listen to this. The Cubs got 4 players just for Santo. There was nobody else going to the White Sox.
And Sano, in '74 is like God, like a 33-year-old diabetic third baseman.
Yeah, he was bad. He was done. He didn't even finish the '74 season, right? He retired.
Maybe, yeah.
Um, they got Ken Frayling, Steve Stone, Steve Swisher,
Wow.
and Jim Cronell, all for Ron
Oh,
Santo. Did you know this? This is what I learned. I didn't know this. That just before that, Ron Santo was the first player to ever use his 10-5 rights to block a trade. The Cubs had
fun
worked
fact.
out a deal with the Los Angeles, or were they? They're probably the California Angels, probably in '97. They might have been the LA Angels
Yep.
back then.
Near California.
And Ron said, "Fuck it, I'm not going to LA." So they traded him across town. Which honestly, if you're Ron, it's worse. Go to LA. Don't go play for the fucking White Sox, where you got to play second base because Bill Melton is the third baseman.
Oh, yeah. He was like, but like, how obstinate of Santo too to be like, I don't know.
Yeah,
Like,
I'm
well, he
not
was
going
under
there.
contract.
I can't sell Ron Santo pizza in LA.
Yeah. But he was done though. Like, but then you can't expect him to retire. He's not going to forfeit that
Well, he
money.
played, he played 117 games for the '74 Sox. I don't know if he
second
finished
base,
or not.
Okay.
5 homers, 41 RBIs. He played second, third, first, and shortstop. I don't know how many games he played at shortstop.
Whoa.
Hopefully he played an inning at shortstop. He literally played 1 inning at shortstop. All right.
And meanwhile, Steve
Anthony
Stone,
Rizzo
I believe,
played third base longer than that.
that's right, which helped out for rotisserie owners. I think too, like Steve Stone, I believe, was drafted by the Giants, found his way, so he went to the Sox and then the Cubs. Okay, yeah, true. That is kind of a fun fact. Obviously, probably two of the more in the history of the Cubs, they chew up a lot of space as far as their respective presences as color commentators on the radio and television side for the Cubs in later years.
Yes, Stone had been drafted by the Giants. He got traded to the White Sox with Ken Henderson. I don't know who that is.
Future Cub. We talked about Ken Henderson.
Ken Henderson?
Yeah, we've talked about him. He had a nice long career. He ended up with the Cubs.
Oh, yeah, he did.
We talked about him because he was on the 1980 Cubs, I'm pretty sure.
Yes, he was. Hit 195.
Yeah.
Then he gets traded to the Cubs. Then he pitches for the Cubs for 3 years. He's granted free agency. Signs with the White Sox.
So we went back to the White Sox.
I pitched there for 2 years, and then it was off to Baltimore.
And then he won 25 games in 1980. Blew out his arm.
Yep. He would only pitch. He was done in '81.
Bob Welch is the last pitcher to win 25 games in the big leagues. He did it now. It's been 33 years, 1990. When he did it, he was the first guy to do it since Steve Stone, and it felt like a really long time, which had been 13 years. But obviously, it's like a unicorn now. Nobody wins 25 games. No one will ever win 25 games again.
It is funny because Stone, if you look, he was an All-Star. He won the Cy Young. He finished 9th in MVP voting. All that happened in his career. It all happened in 1980. Completely nondescript career other than that. Although he won 15 games for the '77 White Sox.
Fine. But yeah, in 1982, he was out of baseball.
4.5 ERA. So the only good year, I mean, he was good in '79.
For a World Series, for a pennant winner.
Yep.
So kudos to him.
He was great in '80, and then he was done.
It's funny, yeah. He was surrounded by. Baltimore was known for their pitching. He doesn't necessarily stand out year over year, except for those 2 years, because there was more Mike Flanagan, Jim Palmer, Scott McGregor. They were all considered better pitchers than Stone, but Stone's the guy that won 25.
1977, the Cubs send the great Steve Renko to the White Sox for Larry Anderson. Not that Larry Anderson.
Well, is it Larry? Not the one with the SBN that was a very pithy.
Nope.
Why do
Not
we
the guy who got traded for Jeff
Parkways
Bagwell. This was Larry Anderson with ON.
Park and driveways. And who was the other guy you just mentioned? Because I had Steve Renko. I used Steve Renko in Immaculate Grid the other day.
Yeah, Steve Renko.
I believe it was Angels Royals. Steve Renko, because I used to collect baseball cards. Oh, Steve Renko, another Cubs stock, huh?
Larry Anderson never pitched for the Cubs. So
Okay.
Cubs won that trade. 1981, Dennis Lamb for Ken Kravec.
Yeah, I've talked about it in multiple episodes before. How we felt that we had pantsed the Sox because Dennis Lamp was a weird glasses wearing, mustachioid weird middle reliever, sometimes a starter. He did throw a one-hitter with the Cubs against the Padres, and I only knew that from the back of the Stops card. But Ken Krivik, we thought was a really good pitcher for the Sox. And we're like, holy shit, man, I can't believe the Sox gave us Ken Krivik for Dennis Lamp, Mr. Foggy Glasses wearer. And then Ken Krivik proceeded to go 1-7 and never pitched again. And Dennis Lamp actually threw another one-hitter for the White Sox, was pretty good for them, and then actually carved out a nice little sort of a short reliever, long reliever career for some good Blue Jays teams in the 80s.
I think Lamp only pitched that 1 year for the Sox.
Yeah, he threw a one-hitter. Good old Rusty Kuntz.
No, that's not right. He pitched 3 years for them. Then he went to the Blue Jays, the A's, the Red Sox.
And I talked about like my dad who would watch Sox games just to watch or like listen to them because they went to Sports Vision. They weren't on TV. But, it must have been they were on TV because I remember watching it. Yeah, because they went to Sports Vision in '82. So in 1981, Dennis Lamp, that's when he threw his one-hitter for the White Sox. And the one-hitter got broken up either in the 8th or 9th inning. But the Sox had a gritty center fielder, unfortunately named Rusty Kuntz.
Oh, yes.
Who I think he made a diving catch earlier to keep the no-hitter alive, but he attempted to make a diving catch on Lamp's. I don't know who it was. Was it Robin Young? But anyway, couldn't pull it in. But Dennis Lamp ended up having a much better career than Ken Krivik.
Now, Ken Krivik led the American League in the same category in back-to-back years, 1978 and 79. What do you think it was?
Was it hit by pitch?
It was. He hit 10 guys in 78 and 14 in 79. He lost 16 games in 78 and lost 13 in 79. But
Does he have any peripherals that would have suggested that our household should have been unduly excited for?
No, because in 80 he was 3-6 with a 6.94 ERA. He gave up 100 hits in 81 innings.
I think we just hated.
He struck out
Dennis Lamp.
In his career in 557 innings pitched. In 858 innings pitched, he struck out 557 guys.
Yeah,
good
I think we just hated Dennis
a little more than
Lamp.
half a strikeout an inning. So he's
maybe because he was more of a starter.
He was Mike Kruko's buddy though. So
all right.
Got that going for him, which is nice. 1982, trade of superstar prospects, Ty Waller for Reggie Patterson.
Ty Waller, opening day center fielder in 1982. Reggie Patterson was shot in Brazil playing winter ball about a couple weeks after in 1984, a couple weeks after Ben Wilson was shot, and also Reggie Patterson served up the 4,191st hit of Pete Rose's career, which was one shy of the record that Eric Shaw would eventually serve up for.
Trade I remember. I mean,
we talked about this trade.
1983.
Yeah, when Dallas Green was compromised.
Just loading up. There's all kinds of stars. Scott Fletcher, Randy Martz, Pat Tabler, and Dick Tidrow to the White Sox for Steve Trout and Warren Brewster.
And so we've talked about this in multiple episodes. That was when somehow Fergie Jenkins' second time around was so valuable that Dallas Green, who would sometimes make mistakes like this. He did the same thing with the Sutcliffe trade.
Didn't seem to know any of the rules.
Yeah.
And didn't have anybody. The Cub front office was probably him and
Goldsberry.
What was the ticket guy who ended up there? Chuck Wasserstrom.
Frank Maloney.
Frank Maloney. That's right. Chuck was the PR guy. It was Sharon Panazzo, Chuck Wasserstrom, and Dallas Green, and they didn't know any of the rules.
About like contracts or waiver moves, and so somehow Fergie Jenkins, even though he was old, he was turned out to become his best pitcher in '82, and he turned out to be their opening day starter in '83, but not before Dallas Green had to supposedly make a trade under which he was compromised by giving up the great Pat Tabler and Scott, just a bunch of flat stamp. Yeah. The one good player out of that was Steve Trout, who would have his career year in '84. So the Cubs won that trade. Yeah. But at the time, it was basically considered that Green was compromised, and the Sox had.
So what was the deal? The Sox had claimed Fergie, and in order to keep them from getting him, he had to work out a trade. That's great that the White Sox had him completely over a barrel and somehow traded the best player.
And that was a Sox team that would go on to win the division that year. They didn't need Trout. They had
Scotty Fletcher played for them.
And it probably should have played more. Instead, they had Jerry Dybzinski running the bases in Game 4 of the playoffs. So, they didn't use. And you mentioned this in a previous episode. Pat Tabler had a nice career. He was the Grand Slam king in the '80s.
Well, he's the bases loaded The bases were
That's
loaded. You wanted Pat
that's
Tabler up.
right. That's the guy that Roland Heeman traded for Jerry Dybzinski. So Pat Tabler had Roland Heeman stayed put and not acquired Jerry Dybzinski for Pat Tabler, who again it was a dumb move in the long run because Tabler is probably the one of those four players that was. Randy Martz was a Cub prospect who sucked, and Dick Tidrow was at the end of his career. Tabler gets traded for Jerry Dybzinski, and of course Jerry Dybzinski makes a locally notorious base running gaffe in the Game 4 of the playoffs against Baltimore that year.
All right, here's Pat Tabler's career with the bases loaded. This is not an insignificant sample. 109 plate appearances. He hit .489 with a .505 on base and a .693 slug. He hit 2 grand slams, drove in 108 runs.
Wow. And how many plate appearances?
109. 108
Jesus
RBIs
Christ.
and 109 plate appearances. 88 at bats. Pretty good.
Yeah. Sox could have used him instead they had Jerry D. But the Cubs won that trade, especially because the Sox turned around and traded Tabler. But yeah, Steve got one good year to Steve Trout. Cubs win that trade.
It's funny. Pat was a pretty good player. 282, 345, 379 for his career. Not a lot of power. 47 homers in 1,000 games.
Kind of a moneyball player there, 3-4. I don't know kind of feel. I think he got moved to the outfield too.
Yeah, he
wasn't
played
much
first,
of a
third,
fielder.
and left.
Yeah, he was a second baseman for the Cubs.
He was the He was the 16th pick overall by the Yankees.
Yeah, because we talked about in '81 when we did 81 Cubs. Like I remember, like there was a rumor that he was a hot prospect because that was an '81 Yankees team that went to the World Series. And yeah, we got him. We were excited to get Pat Tabler, and he was. He had a good
Caudle
career.
and Jay Howell.
Yeah, two of the many Cubs relievers that we didn't know would become significant relievers in later years.
Yeah. 1992.
Oh,
one of the greatest trades of all time.
Who can forget Ken Patterson?
Ken Patterson for George Bell, and then a throw in some guy named Samuel Peralta Sosa. The Cubs win that trade.
Yeah.
Remember
I don't know. I don't know. Sammy's not in the Hall of Fame.
One of the motivating factors behind the trade was that George didn't want to come to spring training because he was busy running his gas station in the Dominican.
That's right. And of course, Larry Himes, the sourpuss that he is, isn't going to put up with that. Yeah.
George had been an all-star in '91 for the Cubs.
Oh. Yeah, he was one of the 3 free agent signings that Jim Fry had brought along that didn't suck, but still wasn't good enough to save Fry's job. Danny Jackson and Dave Smith were horrible. But yeah, Bell was okay. We had Bell and Dawson in the corners. We had some poppers in '91. But
he only played 2 years for the White Sox.
Yeah, he was a malcontent. He was a malcontent by '93. He would need to get off the bench to DH in the playoffs. They had a Bo Jackson and George Bell were the DH in the playoffs.
He hit 38 homers for the White Sox in 2 years. In 13 years with the Cubs, Sammy hit 545. Is that more? That seems like that's more. Remember that when we get to another trade.
Well, speaking of the home runs, too, I think Forklift pointed out the Sox never even had a home run hitter to Bill Melton or something. Like, they don't have any, like, Frank Thomas went over 300. But yeah. So, yeah, Sammy hits 500 for the Cubs. George, 38.
They didn't trade again until 1998.
1998. Hold on. Let me see. That's a good Cubs team. 1998. Was it in season or
it's at the trade deadline.
Oh, yeah.
Ed Lynch shitting his pants and panicking.
Would give up a piece of that World Series Sox team.
Yeah, he made 2 terrible trades on the same day.
Yeah.
He traded the one with Florida didn't really hurt him. Todd Noel didn't turn out but it did hurt him because he got Felix Heredia, and Felix hurt him repeatedly. And he traded former first-round pick John Garland to the White Sox for Matt Karchner. And Matt Karchner was terrible for the Cubs.
So bad. So Kerry Wood was Ed Lynch's first ever draft pick in '95. Todd Noel was his first ever draft pick in '96, or his first round draft pick in '96. Traded him in '98, and then Jack Garland was the first round pick in '97.
And the thing that always pissed me off was apparently, so Ed tells Andy McPhail, his boss, the 2 trades he's just made. And Andy's apocalyptic. He's apoplectic, not apocalyptic. He's apoplectic. He's so pissed off. It's like, you were his boss, right? Why did you leave him unsupervised? Shouldn't he have had to run these by you, and you could have said, no, this team is not worth This team is not worth trading two number one picks on the same day for mediocre relief pitchers.
Oh my
Just take a
God! Can you
breath.
imagine
We'll
it?
find somebody on waivers who will do better than these two guys. Say just let him do it. He say, "Well, I let him do it. It's his job." It's like, well, not if he's going to do it that way. No. What are you?
Just sitting here right now, I feel how absurd that is to deal your most recent two draft picks.
Yeah.
Now he just drafted Corey Patterson in '98 because his
Think of what would
mismanagement
have
yielded
happened.
him number 3 pick.
What would the prospect perverts have done to Ed Lynch
Oh,
if he
they
did
would have
that
lynched
today?
him. They would have made his last name a verb.
Ugh. Karchner pitched 29 innings for those Cubs. He gave up 30 hits, walked 14 guys, had an ERA of 5.14.
Yeah, he was somehow
The run
managing
fairy,
to already.
Felix Heredia, was 3-0 with a 4.08 ERA. He gave up 19 hits and he only pitched 17 innings. And yeah, he wasn't good. But thanks, Ed.
Yeah.
Scarred from that, they do not make another trade until 2017. This is right after the All-Star game, or maybe right before the
Oh
All-Star game.
yeah, we can talk about this one.
The Cubs get control. He had a lot of controllable years left. That was why he was so valuable. They got Jose Quintana, and they gave up Dylan Cease, Eloy Jimenez, Brian Fleet, and Matt Rose. 4 guys to get one Jose. Now in 17, Jose was good. Like he had a great first start against the Orioles. He shoved it up the Brewers 3 times.
Yep. Even the Cardinals.
In 17, he came in
out.
he had to come in out of the bullpen in crazy game 5, and he pitched well.
Yes.
And then because they torched that bullpen in game 5, he was supposed to start game 1, and then I guess he did, right? But his wife had some kind of panic attack on the plane, and they literally had to detour to Albuquerque on the way to LA. So they get in at like the crack of dawn before game 1, and everything went bad. Dylan Cease has turned into a good pitcher, and I feel like, knowing the Cubs' track record of developing pitchers, he wouldn't have been if they'd have kept him. So it did him a favor by trading him somewhere else.
They didn't have the pitch lab then?
Well, they did, but no, but they still. Justin Steele, it took him 9 years to get to the big leagues.
And
9.
like, at some point, right.
8 years to get to the big leagues, 9 years now to be good.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
Dylan Cease won 14 games last year with a 2.20 ERA. And on a bad team this year, he's got a 4.40 ERA. But he has struck out 138 batters in 113 innings.
No.
He did lead the league in walks last year. So there's that. And he's got a terrible mustache.
He does.
And then there's Eloy, who...
can't stay healthy. Can't play the field.
I think part of the reason they traded Eloy was thinking that, well, he's not really an outfielder, so what the hell is he going to do on our team? Of course, now there's a DH. They didn't know there was going to be a DH. He can't stay healthy. Like, he's a good player when he plays. These are his career games played. 122 games in 19. He actually played 55 games in the pandemic year. That was good. But the last 3 seasons, he only played 55 games in 21. He only played 84 games last year, and he's missed more than 30 games already this year.
Jeez.
This year, his slash line, 277, 321, 466, which is just kind of
That's not that good. That's not.
He makes a lot less money than Ian Happ, but that's who he would have replaced.
Similar numbers. He is a corner outfielder. All right, so no regret there. And right now, Steve's is 5, but the team sucks, so there's no concern there about John Garland.
The thing that makes it bad for Cub fans with Eloy is that he destroys the Cubs.
He has. He had that one series a few years ago.
His career against the Cubs in only 13 games. He has 6 homers, 15 RBIs, a 340, 426, 830 slash line. He's slugging 830 for his career against the Cubs.
All right.
So that's why Cub fans are like, oh, I can't believe he traded.
All right, you know, if that's the price we have to pay for Sammy Sosa's 545 career home runs and Steve Trout's 14-7 record in '84, it doesn't quite offset John Garland's not 05, but I'll have to think about that.
And the last trade between the two teams, I'm sure until tomorrow when they trade Nick Madrigal back.
Yes.
The trade that I was pissed off the day they made it, and I get more pissed just watching this little fucker run around it. Craig Kimbrell to the White Sox for Nick Madrigal and Cody Hoyer. Um, Cody, his elbow has fallen off and continues to fall off, and it's too bad
Yeah.
because I think he actually would have been pretty good. Madrigal is a tiny person masquerading as a big league baseball player. And the thing that makes me mad about this whole thing was people, I think it's easy to forget because it didn't go well for him with the White Sox, and then it didn't go very well for him last year, though he was an All Star again this year. Is at the trade deadline in 2021, Craig Kimbrell was the most valuable piece anybody had to trade. Listen to this. This was his numbers at the trade deadline. In 39 games, his ERA was 0.49.
Less than half.
In 36 and two-thirds innings pitched, he had struck out 64 men. He had given up
Nearly
13 hits and 13 walks. His ERA plus, 100 is league average. You want to take a guess what his ERA plus was?
Double that.
It was 865.
8 times that.
And they got Nick Madrigal and Cody Hoyer for that. And as Cub fans, like, we know what it means to your team if you add a dominant closer to it right before the playoffs.
Yeah.
Didn't like the guy we got, but they won the World Series in large part because they had Aroldis Chapman at the back of the bullpen.
Even though he blew a couple of games in the playoffs, but and as it turned out, but that's all in retrospect. Kimbrell was not. Of course, he couldn't have been expected to keep up that pace, but he was.
Well, they didn't use him as a closer.
Good.
He suddenly became the eighth inning guy.
Yeah,
it was bad for them.
It tells you like what a moron Jed is, because the Sox were like hedging their bets. They're like, well, we don't really need him, so we'll give you Nick Madrigal. And just got it. As opposed to Jed taking him to another team and be like, do you need a closer, or do you need some douchebag that's going to be there in the eighth inning?
So now, Jet apologists, and I'm sure this is true, and it does tug on your heartstrings a little bit.
Is that such a thing?
Kimbrell's daughter was sick. And
I remember that now.
Leaving him in Chicago meant they didn't have to leave her behind, alone in the apartment, which they probably wouldn't have done. I'm sure the wife would have stayed with her, but she got to keep her doctors, she got to keep all that stuff. So I get that, but you have to get more for him than that, or otherwise you're just gonna have to say, "Sorry, Craig, we can't." Or how about this? Don't trade him to the White Sox.
Milwaukee?
Because it pissed me off. Just keep him. Get a draft pick. You're good at that. No. They didn't. It's bad. It was a bad trade, and it's worse because Nick Madrigal is still around than it would be if.
Right. Well, and as you say that, now Jed's convinced to compound his mistakes by trying to justify having made it in the first place.
Right. To me, I think that's completely why they keep shoving Nick Madrigal down our throats. Look, this is going to work. It's like, no, it's not.
Well, and it's like, Jed maybe has enough self-awareness to realize, that's one of those things that's really going to be used against me, or maybe, or possibly could be. So,
look,
shit.
Playing that guy isn't going to make it better. So, just take the beating.
Yeah, cut your losses.
But it's funny. I do love, little Bert Taylor wrote about this. Oh, because Madrigal got hurt while he was red hot. Oh, it's really going to hurt his trade value. It's I cannot express to you enough. He has no trade value. No one wants him. No team that is seriously trying to win anything wants Nick Madrigal on their roster. They just don't.
I feel like Jed Hoyer just absolutely mindlessly threw Rick Hahn a lifeline, because Hahn made the dumb decision to draft Madrigal as high as he did in the first place.
Right. Instead of having to just cut bait on the fourth pick in the draft, you got a reliever for him. It was supposed to work out.
So now he feels fine. And meanwhile,
then they traded Kimbrell. So they got something for him, because that's the other thing. The Cubs could have just kept him. He wasn't a free agent. He had another year on his deal. So there was complete panic. Let's see. That's
almost as bad as Carson for Gar. It's pretty much on the same level.
And it was cheap. That other year, there was no money on it. It was so attractive. It was a no-brainer that this guy was worth so much, and they got nothing. He got traded. The White Sox turned him into A.J. Pollock. Good job.
Wow. Which I know A.J.'s hurt, but hey, man, I know.
He's not even a Dodger.
I know.
He's not even a White Sox anymore.
He's out of baseball, whatever. But still, they got
Now
that, which
he's
was,
kind of out of baseball. He's in Seattle.
but he was worth. Look, if you turn Mick Madrigal into a chance to
Yeah.
maybe catch AJ Pollock for like might finally stay healthy and he showed spurts, but that's about as good as
Well,
you can expect for
how
Nick
about this?
Madrigal.
I would wager. Well, I know this is true. AJ Pollock hit 14 home runs for the 22 White Sox. Nick Madrigal has 3 career home runs. Will he in his
Yeah,
career hit more than those 14 home runs? No, of course he won't.
no way. He won't even get to half. He will not hit. Put the over under at half. Put that at. You said 14 is the number.
14. Yeah, he won't get to
Yeah,
7.
he's not going to get enough opportunity.
He's
Nick
only hit the ball to
Madrigal.
the warning track twice as a Cub.
So Nick Madrigal has 3 things in common with Mick Kelleher. First name rhymes. First and last names. Nick Madrigal, 4 syllables, and neither of them can hit a ball further than 280 feet without the benefit of a strong tailwind.
Okay, the last thing I wanted to do here was I have a list of, and we're not going to go through them all, but there's a list of guys who played for both teams. It's
Oh,
pretty illustrious.
I
There
like
are
this.
some old favorites on this list, and it's in alphabetical order here.
Is Bob Molinaro on that list?
Oh, I'm sure he is.
Sorry. All right.
Very first guy on the list, number 1 in your, he replaced Henry Aaron as number 1 alphabetically in the baseball register.
Wait, Don Ossie didn't pitch for either
No,
team.
this is even less than Don Ossie. This is AAR,
Oh, yeah, David Ardsma.
David Ardsma, which
That's
is
right.
we turned that
That's
into
for
a verb
both.
for shaving your balls. Was Ardsma.
Correct. With a dry, rusty razor, according to Fleck.
Yeah. Did you know Paul Asemacher pitched for the White Sox?
Nope.
Yeah, very
We've
handsome.
talked about the ass maker a ton, and
Yes.
nope, not only think that even came up before. What
Of course.
year?
That's a good
95. Never mind. No, that's all
No,
right. I
I
can
can
look it
get it. I got him here.
up. Now I'm
Asemacher
curious.
pitched for the Sox in '94. Oh, he missed the
94.
playoffs by a year.
So he was traded for Tuffy Rhodes at the end of '93, and then he's showing. Okay, all right.
Worked his
Very
way over there.
recently.
He may have been
Yeah,
the reason they went on strike. Oh, he could have been on.
No.
That was the. Oh, that was it. We didn't talk about that. The greatest Sox team of all time, and they didn't get to go to the playoffs because their owner
Yes.
decided he wanted to strike. Although that's always
Yeah.
been bullshit because the Yankees were like finally putting it all together. Like they were, and the
Yeah.
Indians, who were really good in '95,
Indians are really
had started
good, yeah.
steamrolling straight at the White Sox. So
Yeah, right. But they were in the pick. I'd like to think that and they were legit. I'd like to think that they would have.
they were
done a World
good,
Series
but they act like
at their-
they act like they canceled the World
Well-
Series. It's between them and Expos fans. Both of them are convinced
Right.
that they won the World Series in '94, but it just wasn't played.
Yep. Exactly right.
Yeah.
We
But
should do a
the
mythical
Indians
94
in the
Expos
shortened
White
season
Sox.
in '95 won 100 games.
When they play 100, yep, they play 154. Yep. Yeah, Indians were on the rise. I think 94 was actually when they started becoming rivals, like Batgate. Do you remember, like, there was a game
Yeah.
in Comiskey Park where Albert Bell's bat was stolen? I think that was like 94. That was way early in that rivalry. But, yeah, like the Sox were sort of had been building. Larry Hines started that thing, and then it was replaced by Ron Schuler, and then they finally went break through and win the division 93. And then just as quickly, Cleveland was challenging their supremacy and would surpass it. So 94 was sort of the two ships crossing in the night.
The unofficial world champion '94 White Sox at the time of the strike had a 1-game lead over the Indians, and
game,
had a
okay.
worse record than the Yankees.
Yeah, okay.
They were on their way. Anyway, we talked about George Bell. How about the great Jason Beret?
Great year for the Cubs
He did.
until Don Baylor leaned on too hard in that San Diego game in which Ryan Kleskoord eventually hit a lead-changing grand slam off of Jeff Fassero.
Jeff Fassero, the troll.
Yes, but yeah, Beret kind of came out of nowhere and like slotted in as the Sox fourth. They had McDowell and Fernandez, and then Wilson Alvarez was their third. And then also they went and acquired Tim Belcher at the trade deadline. That was supposed to be a big trade,
Yeah.
but like as that was happening, Jason Beret was like, "Fuck Tim Belcher, I'm better than him, and Belcher was like an afterthought. And Beret just kept winning, and then he is hurt and shit like that. But when he resurfaced for the Cubs in '01, we got one really nice year out of him. I'll say that.
I don't remember this guy as a player, but I do remember they had a stadium named after him. Hiram Bithorn played for both the Cubs and the White Sox. When the Cubs had to play in Puerto Rico against against the Expos in 2004, right?
When future Cub Jose Macias, who you put on your immaculate grid today,
yes,
hit a pop up that bounced a very sad and frustrating Cubs, and in the '04 season, of course. In which a shitty
Alex Gonzalez, right? Didn't catch it?
Yeah, because I forget the details. It was like a miscommunication. The ball dropped between three infielders.
Jose Macias, the Gremlin. One of the most
I did not know that. I did not know that he was a former Cub, whoever that stadium was.
Former Cub and White Sox. Hiram Bithorn.
Wow. Nice call.
Guy we talked about during our extensive talk about Cubs center fielders, Emilio Bonifacio, played for both the Cubs and the White Sox. How about Bobby Bonds?
I remember Bobby Bonds as a Cub.
I didn't remember him as a White Sox, but he did it.
No, it was before our
1978.
That's why. I only know about it because it was like the end of his career. The Cubs were his last stop. Yeah, Bobby Bonds is one of those guys that, like in those Bugs Bunny cartoons, they have a suitcase with like stickers for like all those cities. Like back before, like nowadays, it's probably more common. Bobby Bonds played for like 10 different teams. It seems like.
Former Cub great pinch hitter Thad Bosley.
Sure, talked
Cub
about him
White
coming
Sox.
off the bench the weekend that Pete Rose became the first player manager since former White Sox and Cub Don Kessinger. Huh? How about tying that together, Andy?
Yeah, good.
Don Kessinger was the last player manager until Pete Rose in '84 against the Cubs, and then the Cubs took the rubber match when Bosley hit a big 3-run homer that Sunday, and then he got to stay for the Cubs. And he was a former Sox at that point.
The aforementioned 1984 reliever Warren Brewster played obviously for both teams. He was part of that trade. How about Smokey Burgess?
Big fat guy, right? We used to hear about him. Very slow. I didn't know he played for the Cubs. Yeah, I wish my dad were alive. He might have a Smokey Burgess story.
Played for
I
the
heard
Cubs,
about Smokey Burgess.
Early, 49 and 51. He didn't play for the Sox until 64. So he probably wasn't fat with the Cubs.
Big fat catcher.
First baseman, big old number 44.
Phil
MVP,
Cavarretta.
Phil Cavarretta. He played for the Cubs from 34 to 53. Played for the White Sox in 54 and 55.
Yeah,
another one of those. I'm not leaving town, so I'll just go play for the White Sox.
You know what? He made a comment. He was the Cubs manager. He was a player manager for a while, and then PK Wrigley. Phil Cavarretta, Chicago guy, went to Lane Tech, played in the World Series in 1935, like a year and a half after playing for Lane Tech. Has a long career. Too old to go off the war, wins the MVP in 45. He's later the Cubs manager in those mediocre teams in the 50s, but then he made a comment in spring training that he didn't think the team would be that good, and P.K. Wrigley fired him in spring training. So he probably like, fuck you, Sox. Actually, the Sox were pretty good. I'm surprised. Yeah. He went there as a player, though. So he was the player manager for the Cubs. I didn't know he'd be like player manager out here. Don Kessinger, Pete Rose. But so he just went to the Sox to play and earn money, I guess.
So he played 71 games for the 54 Sox at third, and he played right and left field. Hit 3 homers and 24 RBIs in limited action, 158 at bats. Hit .316 with a .417 on base, and then he played. Okay. He only played in 6 games in 55. He was done.
Okay.
So he played all 22 seasons in Chicago. 20 for the Cubs, 2 for the White Sox.
Didn't know that. I didn't quite recognize that Phil Cavarretta played for the Sox.
Lefty bullpen guy who was really good for the White Sox and not so good for the Cubs, Neil Kotz.
Oh, I know. Yeah, Neil Kotz traded for Ardsma, I believe.
Then you talked about having a Donahue on who used to play for the Sox. How about which one is it? There's 2 of them here.
Is there Jigs?
It's got to be this guy. The name is Patrick Henry Cozy Dolan.
Oh, you got it.
Yes.
You have a relative.
He played from 1895 to 1906 for the. He played for the Super Buzz. It looked like the Bean Eaters. No, it wasn't Brooklyn. That
Oh,
was Boston.
Boston. Yeah, yeah,
Played
yeah,
for the
yeah.
Bean Eaters. Played for the Cubs. Played for. He did play for the Superbuzz, the Brooklyn Superbuzz,
Okay.
which I guess is Superbuzz, right? A terrible nickname.
I don't know how you pronounce it.
Played for the
Yeah, I never.
Reds. Played 27 games for the '03 White Sox, and finished up back with the Bean Eaters, back where it all started.
Okay.
He was
You
a
know,
right fielder, first baseman, and pitcher. He was the Shohei of his time, I'm sure.
what's
Uh,
funny about that is that I'm looking at Jiggs Donahue, who was also on those White Sox teams 04, 05, 06, 07, 08, but not on the 03 Cubs. It could have been
that's because
teammates.
Cozy. That's because Cozy took his spot. Let's see. For the Cubs, he hit 265. For the White Sox, he hit 260. And how about pitching? What did he do pitching wise here? He didn't pitch for either of them. He pitched a lot though. Um, he was 11-13 in his career, 35 games, 255 innings.
Well,
There you go, Cozy Dolan. Who knew? Star for both teams. So old. They got a picture of him, an actual photo, which is nice, but no logo on his hat because they didn't have those back then.
no, or numbers.
How about Scott Downs? Lefty.
Yeah, I forgot he was a White Sox. Scott Downs was shit. He was traded by the Cubs for who? Shit, Andy.
Oh,
Or the Cubs is an Expos.
they got him from the
Expos.
yeah.
Yeah. All I remember is that I went to see
Was
Scott
he
Downs pitch
Rondell?
for the Cubs. Yes, that's what it was. We got Rondell or after. Yes.
So actually, okay, this is good. So he got traded by the Cubs twice.
Oh, because he came back several years later.
He got
That's
traded
right.
for Mike Morgan. No, that's not right. It's opposite.
Yes. We got him for an aging Mike Morgan.
We
like,
did.
in
Yep. Scott Downs,
1998 or something.
98. Scott Downs for Mike Morgan. So this is a return of Mike Morgan.
Yeah, because he was terrible. Right. Yeah. In '98.
Then,
Mike Morgan gave up Mike McGuire's 60th homer in '98 at the
right.
Cubs. Yeah.
So that happens in November of '98. But by May, the Cubs are like, we can't not have Scott Downs. So the Twins traded Scott Downs and Rick Aguilera
That's
to
right.
the Cubs for Kyle Loesch and Jason Ryan. And then a
Yeah.
year later, at the trade deadline, 2000, the Cubs traded him to Montreal for Rondell White.
So, and then in between that, I saw Scott Downs pitch at Wrigley Field in 2000 at the first ever Friday afternoon, his first ever Cubs-Tigers game since Game 7 of the 1945 World Series. Again, it's 2000, so it's the early years of interleague play that we've discussed there at the Sox. It was a novelty. The Tigers come to town for the first time. I am with my buddy. We're sitting way back in the grandstands, and there's a pole, of course, as happens sometimes at Wrigley. It wasn't Ted Klaczewski. It was a literal pole that was, upholding the upper deck as you have at Wrigley. But it just happened to be where the pitcher's mound was. So I think I told the story before. Scott Downs, he threw like a shutout, I think. It was against the Tigers, like June of 2000. So I could say I went to Wrigley Field and I saw Scott Downs throw a shutout, or I saw Scott Downs win a game, but I can't truthfully say it because I was like where Scott Downs was supposed to be from my seat. It was just a giant beam. So just like see this ball launched from this beam over the plate. You weren't looking for the game, were you? Because I guarantee it was 2000. Yeah. We've moved on. And we didn't even talk about Scott Downs as a White Sox. So.
Next guy on the list, Mo Drabowski.
Sure.
So I have
That forklift's not here. You have a Mojo about. He was a pitching coach in '94.
Yeah, but I got a story by G.A. Johnstone in one of his books. So Mo had pitched for the Cubs, and then when he ended up on another team, like he went to looks like he went to Montreal maybe next. No, Milwaukee. Can't tell these abbreviations.
No, the Braves.
He could imitate. It couldn't have been. I was looking. What I was looking up was who was his manager, and he had a bunch of them. He had Bob Sheffing, and he had Charlie Grimm. And I don't know who. He could imitate one of the Cubs coaches' voice perfectly. So he knew that he would sit in the Wrigley bullpen, and he would call over. He would sit in the visitors' bullpen, and he knew the phone for the home bullpen, so he would call it, and he would do the imitation and tell them to get one of the pitchers up. And then all of a sudden, the manager would be sitting in the Cub dugout and look out, and there's a pitcher warming up in his bullpen.
How
And
do
he's
you
like,
call
"Why is
that?
this guy warming up?" And it's like, "Well, it's because Mo had called over and tricked them into thinking that the manager had called to warm up a pitcher." Which, as baseball pranks go, is a pretty good one. It's a pretty harmless, pretty good prank.
Yes, yes.
So that's my Mo Drabowski story.
Good.
One of at least two former Cub managers is next.
Well, Rick Renteria, has he been mentioned yet? We talked about.
Well, I only did players, but yeah, he managed both teams.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was the question again?
This player who went on to manage both the Cubs, or former Cub manager who played for both teams. And there's two of them at least.
Manager.
Just looking at two.
So Don Kessinger is not what you're asking for.
No.
Former. Lee Elia.
Lee Elia played for the 68 Cubs and the 66 White Sox. And good old number 10.
Oh, Bruce Kim.
Bruce Kim played for both the Cubs and the White Sox.
Good call.
How about Johnny Evers? Played for both teams.
Okay. Played for the Chicago, the Whales.
How about this? He played for the Cubs from 02 to 13 and then played for the White Sox in 1922. 9 years later.
Oh, man. Yeah. He played for the Whales, too, in between, so he's a three-timer, major leaguer, Chicago.
We already talked about these next two guys. Scott Ayer, as Lou Piniella called him, Stevie Ayer, and Scott Fletcher.
Okay.
And then how about Japanese right fielder Kosuke Fukudome?
Oh, yeah. Once again. I should just assume, because the Sox have this weird history of, everybody playing for them. So, Ken Griffey, Manny Ramirez. I used Manny Ramirez today in my Immaculate Grid.
Yep.
Jose Canseco ended up with the White Sox. Everybody ends up somehow coming through.
Yep.
And nobody remembers it because nobody remembers the White Sox.
How about the best afro in the business?
Oscar Gamble?
Oscar Gamble played for both teams.
Good call.
Superstar Ross Glode. Remember pinch hitter Ross Glode?
I do. I've referenced him before. He came up. We had Mark Race, and then there was a poor man's Mark Race and Brant Brown, and then a poor man's Brant Brown and Ross Glode. And then Ross Glode ended up having a 5-year run with the White Sox.
So these next two guys are both closers whose nicknames became their first names.
Closers whose nicknames became.
One of them closed for the Cubs before he went to the White Sox, and the other opposite.
The second one is Goose Gossage,
Goose Gossage, right? Yes. Although on the Immaculate Grid you have to type in Rich. Goose does not come up.
Interesting.
Found that out. And the other one would be, which you might not remember he ever pitched for the White Sox.
Who?
Tom Flash Gordon.
Oh, yeah. I kind of do, but I would not have thought of it. I would never in a million years confident it myself.
A key part, I'm sure, of the Rick Sutcliffe trade from the Indians, played for both teams.
Would it be Ron Hassey?
Ron Hassey. The first Cubs left-handed starter in a decade. Larry Himes brought his boy with him.
Greg Hibbard.
A good reliever for both teams. With the Cubs, he's probably best known for being attacked on the mound.
Tom Gamboa? Wait, on the mound, Randy Myers?
No.
Wait, what?
Bob Howard.
Sidrow?
Don't you remember a guy ran out and tried to mess with Bob Howard? That didn't
go
well
I was
for
at
him either.
I was at that. Dude, that's the first time I met Forklift and Chris Troja and Mike Brock. Invited them to my seats.
And which one of them went out and tried to beat up Bobby?
Well, the dude, he was wearing cargo shorts. He was hilarious. That was a crazy game where the Cubs blew a 7-run lead in the 8th. That's why he attacked Howery, but then Soriano ended up winning it with a single to right. So, yeah, good times.
We already talked about Cody Hoyer. We got 3 Jacksons in a row. Can you name the 3 Jacksons? All of them relatively recent.
Well, there's Edwin.
There's Edwin, yes.
There's Darren.
There's Darren.
Drafted by Dallas Green.
And there's 2015 Cub, who bunted and made what's his name, shit his pants.
Austin
Jackson.
That's a huge bunt. That's a bunt that Cub fans should never forget because they were down 1-0 in that series and they were losing early in that game. That was Ben Zobrist's bunt the following season in the World Series year. So mark it, Cubs. Austin Jackson, good young prospect when he came up. I don't even remember him as a White Sox.
A guy who played center field for both teams. We talked about him just the other day.
Well, we must have because we did an exhaustive recollection of center
His
field. Dave
number was part of
Martinez,
his nickname, thanks to the Hawk.
not Dave Martinez. It's a
No,
different
he's
center
coming up.
fielder. Number according to Hawk was his one dog.
One dog, Lance
Yeah.
Johnson.
One dog. Yeah, Hawk did give him that nickname, didn't
Outfielder, pinch hitter, guy who's I've read 3 of his books. Jay Johnstone, who was previously mentioned,
he? Yeah,
played for both teams.
that's right. He was a White Sox with a red hat.
Matt Karchner,
Yeah.
we talked about him. Don Kessinger, we mentioned him. Kimbrel, we talked about him. Ken Kravec, Dennis Lamp. Here's a all-star third baseman for the Cubs who played with his brother on the White Sox. His twin brother,
All-Star.
identical twin brother.
Wait, Ken Henderson and Steve Henderson? Wait,
Nope.
no, wait.
Close.
Ooh,
They were 83. They were 83 White Sox.
Oh yeah, Vance and Rudy Law.
Yeah, Vance and Rudy Law, the twins.
But Rudy didn't play for the Cubs. Vance did. And the Sox.
Brent Lillibridge. I don't know why I even bothered to write him down.
Yeah.
Another one of the center fielders. One of the few postseason stars in center field for the Cubs. Played for everybody for a year. After
you already mentioned Austin Jackson.
After a
oh yeah, Kenny Lofton.
Kenny Lofton.
Yeah. Wow.
Former Cub catcher. Oh, the other 72. He wore 72 for the Cubs, and then couldn't wear it for the White Sox. Big Bob Machado.
Robert Machado. Big Bob Machado. Machado would much preferred over Todd Hundley, the much more highly paid.
This guy who won a World Series as a coach for the Cubs is now won a World Series as a manager for the Nationals and lost his playing job with the Cubs for messing around with Cindy Sandberg. Dave Martinez.
Coming on set, yep.
Allegedly.
Right.
Randy Martz, we talked about. How about here's a couple of great relievers. Couple of black guys with Mick. We're Irish black guys.
Oh, Lynn McLaughlin. Fire, yeah.
And then the guy with glasses, little lefty.
Chuck McElroy pitched for the White Sox?
Chuck McElroy, yep.
How about that?
The original Nick Madrigal. This guy played for the White Sox, the Cubs, and the Cardinals. So when we talk about the trifecta, looks just like him. Actually was better, even though he was a stumpy little guy.
What am I missing? Well, give me an era.
90s. Played second base.
Oh, yeah. It's too late in the podcast.
I forget who. Let me look him up. I'm going to tell you, who was he supposed to replace with the Cubs?
Then the Cubs second baseman after Sandberg, number 7. There's Mickey Morandini. There's.
Oh, he was supposed to replace Mark DeRosa. He was so they trade DeRosa to get Milton Bradley. Now they need a second baseman, and they go get a guy who just played for the Cardinals and a former White Sox. Do you remember Aaron Miles?
Oh, God. Yeah, I do, but not as a White Sox.
Terrible with the Cubs.
That's a pretty good call. That was the replay.
When I say terrible,
reaction.
He made David Descalso look like Daniel Descalso.
Daniel Descalso. Whatever.
Looked like a star. Aaron Miles for the 2009 Cubs hit 185 in 157 at bats. No homers, 5 RBIs, on base average at 224. He slugged 242.
What a joke!
And then he went right back to the Cardinals, where he hit 281 in 2010. Of course, he did.
And that's a team that, at least outwardly from an organizational level, was in contention, at least going into the season. That's a team that's coming off of 97 wins or 98 wins, I believe. And Aaron Miles is your second baseman. Damn. That's whatever.
Well, and then fittingly, next is Nick Madrigal. Okay, we got a couple of fat guys with the same last name. One was a catcher. One was a starting pitcher for the Cubs, the Brewers, and the White Sox. He'd been the White Sox ace.
Oh, yeah, Jaime Navarro.
And then the catcher would be...
A fat catcher? Jim Estienne? No, he never played for the Cubs. You already said Bruce Kim.
Dianer.
Navarro. Yeah.
Little
Okay.
fat guy. He was actually had a pretty good year for the Cubs, I
I
think.
saw him hit a homer once at Wrigley for the Cubs. Yeah.
Um, let's see.
He was their catcher on the same time as
Yes,
Wellington
he played
Castillo.
for the 13 Cubs. He hit 300 with a 365
Yeah.
on base and 240 at
Yeah.
bats.
Yeah. He and Wellington.
Um, before my time, at least, but I always made fun of his name, Wayne Nordhagen.
I remember Wayne Nordhagen.
I
I
remember
asked
nothing about
Bob
his
Mount.
name. It just seemed funny.
Yeah. Yep.
He started his career with the White Sox and then finished it with the Cubs.
Yep.
Pretty good, but not a bad player for the White Sox. 287, 310, 451
He's like
in
a
6 years.
DH third baseman.
Hit
Yeah.
143 for the Cubs in 1983.
Yeah.
One of, I'm trying to think if there's anybody worse. I think he's my least favorite Cub relief pitcher of all time, and he pitched 2 different times for the Cubs, and in between he
Is
pitched for the
that
White Sox.
not
Lou
the Red
Piniella
Fairy?
also hated him with his
It's not Scott Air?
54-foot curveball.
Oh, Will Ullman.
Will Omen. I guess he didn't pitch. He
Lu-
didn't have two stints with the Cubs. He missed 2 full years because of injury. It
yeah,
felt like.
Oscar Acosta, moment of silence, also very much loathed Will Ullman.
Another key part of the aforementioned Kyle Hendricks, Ryan Dempster trade, who was a star for the Cubs, who caught some tough luck, and he went on the disabled list in 2015, and some guy stole his job at third base.
The one-eyed Mike Olt.
Mike Holt, he wasn't one-eyed. He couldn't tear up, right? His eyes dried out.
Something.
I think that's what happened. He couldn't make tears, so he couldn't see.
So nobody knew he was sad when he had his wrist broken. Of course, it had to be forced to play for 4 days.
Just happened.
For the
Yeah,
Cubs.
it happened because he got hurt. He broke it 2 days too early, and they couldn't call
I was
Brian
at the
up
game.
and not fuck
I was
over
at-
his service time. So they made Old
I
play
was
that
at
way.
I was at the game. I was in Coors. That was the one I was on TV in Chicago doing a fist bump. That was the game. It was Saturday night. Oak got hit, and I remember going right away. I'm like, "That's it. He's going on the DL," but not. They had to wait like
Not yet.
4 more days.
Yep.
Yeah.
The only Don I know with 2 N's.
Don Paul, local guy.
Local guy, Don Paul. The real key to the Sosa George Bell trade we talked about, Ken
Teddy
Patterson.
Patterson.
Reggie Patterson,
Yeah.
we talked about.
Yeah, I
Slappy
guess.
Juan
Juan
Pierre, who we talked about.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Juan Pizarro.
70s guy before our time, but
Yep.
yeah, I know the name.
Mike Proley, who I only remember because I got a million of his baseball cards
Yep,
and he
the
sucked.
mustachioed, same here. Don't remember him from TV, but just from Tops.
Here's a guy who pitched for both teams, was a pitching coach for the Cubs. And I, most famously for me, I saw him naked sitting on a lawn chair in the West Michigan Whitecaps clubhouse in 2003.
Did not know that the vulture Phil Reagan had pitched for the White Sox. So I do remember your story about Phil's old balls hanging
Sags.
through the in between
Sack
the
hanging right
big
through the
snap in
the
between
vinyl. Oh, don't get up too fast, Phil. Steve Renko, we talked about. Here was a oddly effective. He was supposed to be a starting pitcher, but Joe put him in the bullpen. He was down there with our old buddy Big Trev in the 2015, and his
Clayton
claim to
Richard?
fame was, yes, he kept getting Jason Hayward out in the playoffs.
Don't
Who knew
remember
it was
him
so
as the White
easy?
Sox.
Clayton Richard.
I don't even right. That should have been a warning sign. Well, yeah.
83 White Sox, 89 Cub. No longer
83 White-
has binocular vision.
We already mentioned Vance Law, right? Or
No.
it was a different context, right? It was
No, this is the guy who had to replace Vance at third base on the 89 Cubs.
Oh, Luis Salazar.
Yes.
So Luis Salazar was an '84 Padre, right? But he was an '83 White Sox.
Wasn't he?
went to
I
the
think he
White
was.
Sox.
I gotta look him up. I think he was an '83 White Sox, and then he was on all kinds of.
I
maybe
thought
I'm
he
wrong.
went Padres. I thought he went Padres, White Sox, Padres, Cubs. So you're saying he went White Sox?
Oh, you're right. He was an '85 White Sox, not an '83 White Sox.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, he went back to the Padres, and he went to the Tigers, and went back to the Padres. Couldn't quit him.
3 times.
So we got him 3
3
times.
times.
Then they
So the
traded
Cubs
him to the
got
Cubs.
him after his
Him
third.
and they got him
Okay.
and Marvell Wynn.
Oh yeah.
And then Marvell got in a fight
He
with
was
Sean
there.
Dunston right on the
That was
field
the
at
next
St.
year, of
Louis.
course.
Right.
Yeah.
Bad move, Marvell.
forgot that Louis Salad Bar had. Yeah, of course. Yeah, he's white.
Man,
85
this is
White
a
Sox.
star-studded trade. Um,
The Marvell one
Luis
or
Salazar, Marvell
another one.
Wynn for Darren Jackson, Kelvin Schiraldi. Player named
Yeah.
later who became Phil Stevenson. Phil
Oh,
was like this hotshot first base prospect from Wichita State who
yeah.
lives in immortality on YouTube because he got caught with a hidden ball trick when he was at Wichita State. And I always think it's funny because I look and see Stevenson at LSU. I'm like, I know, or LSU, I think, not Wichita State. And it's always like, oh yeah, he was a Cub. Of course he was.
Yes.
Um, Valparaiso, Indiana's finest. Pitched for both
Uh,
teams.
and Notre Dame
Best played wide
wide
receiver for Notre
receiver
Dame. Jeff Samardzija.
catching passes from Brady Quinn. No five.
Here's an 84 Cub who pitched for both teams, pitched for the Expos, hyperventilated on the mound in Los Angeles once.
Oh, you mentioned that before.
Yes.
So wait, that's Steve. I mean,
No, close.
No,
Not
no.
Ryan Sandberg, but
Sanderson pitched for the Sox.
Scott
That's
Sanderson.
what it was.
yeah, late in
Human
his career,
Ranger,
right? Pitched for the Sox.
Must
late.
have been, yeah. After Tony La Russa resurrected him.
Ron Santo and Sammy Sosa, who we talked about.
No.
Uh, God, why can't I remember? Was he Rookie of the Year for the Cubs?
Santo?
No. This next
No,
guy.
Billy Williams was. What's that? Billy Williams
Yes,
and Ken Hubbs.
I can remember that.
Who?
2008 Rookie of the Year.
For the Cubs?
Yes,
Giovanni Soto.
Giovanni Soto.
That's right. He was a White
84
Sox
Cub
player.
who started for North Carolina State in the 1974 Final Four.
Daryl Thompson. He played for the 84 Cubs. Wait, are you fucking with me? Who on the 84 Cubs played for the 74? It's the same name guy. It's the same
No.
name guy, isn't it?
No, this guy actually played basketball.
Hey, he played for the White
Big
Sox?
tall guy.
Also,
Played
Tim Stoddard.
Tim Stoddard.
I didn't know he played for the White Sox, too.
Yep.
I do know he was a basketball player. You're right, NC State. Was
Yep,
that the
73,
team that-
74. I didn't say he played a lot. He averaged
No.
5.5
No.
points. Oh, not bad. 5.5 points. Was he like
Well,
6'7",
and-
right? Yeah.
So that's
6'7".
another thing that the 84 Cubs and the 03 Cubs have in common, right? Like, three chances to win one game to go to a pennant. Sutcliffe hasn't lost forever. Pryor would never lose back-to-back. Also, both teams had a Final Four participant.
Kenny Lofton
Kenny
and Tim
Lofton.
Stoddard. And both those guys played for the White Sox and the Cubs.
And I believe they're both from Indiana as well, so let's cap it off. Is he?
I don't know where Stoddard from. I pulled up his college basketball one.
Oh, no, sorry. Yeah.
Um,
So, okay.
guy who would pitch for both teams. He's had a weird name. He pitched for some success for the Yankees. I'm not going to make you guess it. Tanyan Sturtz.
Remember Caden Sturts. Yep.
Outfielder who was talking about this. Claimed he had, when you watched him, it was Keith Law. He was talking about guys who look amazing in batting practice. He said one of the risks you run when you're scouting if you base too much of it on BP and then just four at bats and think you know what a guy is. He's like, there was this guy who played for a long time in the big leagues who, if you watched him take batting practice, you thought he had all kinds of power and that it never translated. He played for both teams. He's currently, although you don't get marquee, he's currently on the postgame show all the time.
Ryan Sweeney?
Ryan Sweeney.
I have to stop real quick because this just blew. I'm kind of freaked out here. But you mentioned, was Tim Stoddard from Indiana? I'm like, Andy, don't look that up. I'm just going down tangents. So I look up Tim Stoddard. Somehow I had it in my head that he went to Indiana.
Is he from
Yeah,
India?
he went to Washington High School, East Chicago, Indiana.
Oh,
There
there
are
you
four players. There are four players in Major League history who went to the same high school. Pat Patterson, 1934. Henry Milton, 1932. The other two, Tim Stoddard and Kenny
go.
Lofton.
Kenny Lofton. Who knew?
Both,
Look at that.
both were Final Four basketball players. Both played on Cubs teams that were that missed the pennant after having three chances to get there. Two different teams. So, whoa! All right, had to bring that up though. That's incredible. That's insane.
Both won
Tim
World
Stoddard
Series
and
for
Kenny
other
Lofton.
teams.
Tim Stoddard, he was on the '79 Orioles. Who did he win a World Series with?
The 83 Orioles.
Wow, he went back to. Oh, it was right before he came to the Cubs.
Yep.
Ah,
Well, wait a minute. Did Kenny win a World Series? I say that
I don't think he
confidently.
did. I don't know that he
I
did.
don't think he did, right? Because he wouldn't have been on. The Indians never won it, and I don't think he was on the Braves when they did.
No, and the Braves only won '95. Yeah, no, I don't
Oh, poor
think
Kenny. He was in the
so.
playoffs a
That's
shitload.
right.
Maybe he was bad
He
luck.
was. Could have been. And I forgot Kenny Lofton also a Cub
Yeah, he never
White
won a World
Sox.
Series. Holy shit, he played in 20 postseason series. He played in 95 games. He played in one, two. Oh, he was a 2002 Giant.
Yeah,
He came
he won the
super
pennant.
close
He
to
won.
winning two
I
World
know.
Series and didn't have either.
He did. He did basically win the pennant and stick it in the heart of the. I remember I had a vendor that was a Cardinals fan, and she was so angry after that game. And she's like, "Fuck Kenny Lofton."
He was great
Oh,
in that series. Here was a guy who pitched for both teams. He was a big acquisition of the Cubs and then couldn't pitch for like 3 months. He was a free agent signing,
oh,
and
Kevin
then
Tapani.
and he pitched well. Well, I shouldn't say pitched well. He won 19 games for the
Yeah,
'98 Cubs with like an
yeah,
ERA,
yeah.
like an 11 ERA or something ridiculous. It was
No, it
terrible.
wasn't that bad.
No, but it wasn't
Tapani.
good.
No, but he pitched better for the Cubs
He
than the
pitched his.
Sox.
He almost pitched a shutout in the playoffs.
Yeah, he
Javi
had one.
Lopez got him right.
Yep. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. No, Tapani was a good Cub. He only had that 1 year at the White Sox. Basically, they swapped Jaime Navarro. It wasn't a trade. Yeah, Navarro was the guy that Reinsdorf put a wheelbarrow of money in front of, and then afterwards said, "I'll never sign a pitcher to a contract more than a couple of years."
Yeah,
And then
he had a 5-year deal with the Cubs, and then he couldn't pitch. He was hurt and couldn't pitch until like July of the
yeah,
'97. He went 9-3 with a
it was
3.39. He
it was
went
a terrible
19 and
team.
9 in '98 with a 4.85 ERA.
Yeah, yeah,
244 hits allowed in 219 innings.
yeah. He's getting old.
Uh, he had a good run with the Twins. He only
And
pitched 1 year for the White Sox. I thought he was there longer.
and
than that.
a good friend of ours currently resides in the home that Tapani lived in when he pitched for the Cubs. Right. I believe the last Cubs game he went to, we went you, me, Oleg, and Bill.
Oh,
Bill,
he lives. Oh, that's
Bill
right.
C. He bought Kevin Tapani's house.
Of course.
Not from Tapani. I think there's one owner removed, but like invariably
Milton Bradley.
he comes across items that belong to Tap. So he has been in touch with him to get those items back.
We haven't talked about this guy. I don't know how to give a clue. What year did he pitch for the Cubs?
When he pitched for the Sox, tell me that.
Let's see. This guy pitched for the Cubs from 79 to 82, and he pitched for the 83 White Sox. His nickname would give it away.
79 to where's it? Lynn McLaughlin, Randy Marth, Dennis Lamp, Ken Kravik. I mean, I'm nailing all the. Who am I missing? Warren Brewster,
Dirt.
Steve Trout. Who?
Dirt. Dick
Yeah,
Tidrow.
I mentioned Tidrow.
We did?
Yeah, earlier. He's another guy that was name checked earlier a few
Yeah.
times.
All right.
He was part of that. He was part of those trade where the Dallas Green was compromised.
So I knew we talked about
trade,
Dennis Lamp. I didn't remember we talked about
okay.
Tidrow.
Well, he was part of that
Oh.
Dallas Green being compromised over Fergie Jenkins.
Okay. Steve Trout. We talked about him. I don't believe he ever fell off a stationary bike for the White Sox, but he did for the Cubs.
No. Probably did a lot more blow for the Sox just because he was a lot younger, I guess.
This guy was I barely remember him as a Cub. Well, I pitched in 4 games, so I'm not even going to bother. Luis Vizcaino pitched 4 games
Luis.
for the '09
Yeah.
Cubs, but he pitched
was-
one full season for the White Sox.
He was a Brewer that was
Yeah.
involved in the infamous Carlos Lee Scott Pacetic trade. Remember this, folks. Carlos Lee was run out of town by Ozzie Guillen because he didn't hustle, tagging up for a fly ball against the Twins the year before. And he's not the kind of player that Ozzie wants. So they trade Carlos the Brewers for Luis Vizcaino, Scott Pacetic. 2 things happened. Early in the 05 season, Carlos Lee takes out Todd Walker of the Cubs, who, on a double play, because he was finally deciding, I'm going to hustle now because Ozzie yelled at me last year. Todd Walker gets hurt. originally Neffy saved the season, but then didn't, and it was just. And then Scott had said Nick would hit two of the flukiest homers in postseason history that season. So not that I'm bitter.
No.
So yeah, that's my Luis Vizcaino. I did not know he pitched for the Cubs either. So
this next guy is a Hall of Famer, Hall of Fame relief pitcher.
I already said Dick Tidrow.
One of the first, yeah, one of the first like closers in baseball history. Pitched for the New York Giants.
I know who it is.
The Orioles, the White Sox. Hoyt Wilhelm.
Yeah, I didn't even pitch for the Cubs.
Well, he pitched for the Cubs when he was 47 years old. In 1970, he pitched 3 games. Wow. The Cubs can claim him because the White Sox, if the White Sox had him for 3 games, they'd have claimed him. The White Sox had him for, they got him when he was 40. And they had him until he was 45.
Wow.
He was,
they had him.
He was Wilhelm. 41 and 30, pitched 21 years. He didn't break into the big leagues until he was 29.
It's always the name that I've heard since I was a kid.
I don't know if it's because of the war, but he broke in 52. What war was he? Did he go around? He went from. I'm going to Korea too. I'm going to go from here to Korea.
He led the league in winning percentage in games and ERA in his first big league season. It had to be the first rookie of the year. So he's a phenom, 15-3. Probably blew out his arm. Oh, he was awesome.
No, he started pitching at 52, and he pitched straight through to 72.
I love that he finished 39 games. He pitched 68 games and 39, 15 saves. He was like the early. You're right. He was sort of. Because I always thought Ted Abernathy or I forget Jim Constantine were like the first relievers. But yeah, that's kind of how I remember Hoyt Wilhelm. He was like this weird, like hybrid guy that like never existed. The types of him did not exist before. He led the league with an ERA in 59, 7 years after his rookie year.
So in 52, he's a 29-year-old rookie, and he finishes 4th in Rookie of the Year. He finished behind the guy who won it was a Cub.
In 52?
Yeah.
Hank Sauer. For MVP or
Rookie of the Year. Oh no, that's MVP. Sorry. Where's Rookie of the Year? He finished 4th in Rookie of the Year, but he finished 2nd in Rookie of the Year voting to Joe Black.
Okay. Joe Black pitched for the Dodgers in the World Series that year.
For MVP, guys that Hoyt finished ahead of that year, Stan Musial, Enos Slaughter, Jackie Robinson, Duke Snyder.
Wow. As a rookie.
But yeah, Hank Sauer, MVP. 37 homers, 120 RBIs.
As a 29-year-old rookie.
29, that's a Patrick Wisdom rookie. That's quite a career. I wonder. It seems odd to get started so late. Let's see. Let's look at his minor league stats real quick. Do they even have them? They got a link. I don't know. But yeah, he was a Hall of Famer. 8-time All-Star, pitched in the 54 World Series. Hoyt Wilhelm. And the last guy I have here is a catcher for both teams. Oh, my network is crapping out at me. All right. Last guy I got here was a catcher for both teams. Was an 89 Cub.
Oh, that should be Rick Rona?
Rick Rona, good old number 1.
Much discussed. You know, guys like Rick Rona have been mentioned on this podcast probably. I'm sure Rick Rona's name was probably mentioned at least 12 times.
Rick's probably a subscriber. Played 4 games for the 93 White Sox. I'm sure he was a key member of their playoff push.
Yeah, he and Ron Karkovice.
Yeah, there you go. So that, I think, is everything and more that anybody would ever want to know about the Cubs and the White Sox.
I would say if you're not fired up for this Cubs Sox series after listening to this right now, then you just don't have any oxygen in your veins.
I'm going to check real quick to see if they have made the Nick Madrigal trade yet.
Right. We may have to update this in
Yeah,
real time in case there are any last stuck in case we did trade Madrigal back.
not yet. I do see though, former White Sox manager Ozzie Guillen um, now is playing the Immaculate Grid, and he had an immaculate on Sunday. He posted an immaculate thing. But we can
Oh,
see who he picked though. He didn't put the. He hasn't learned how to hide the
right.
pictures.
Right.
But congratulations, Ozzy. Good for you.
Yeah, there were Cubs and Sox today. I actually used Kevin Tapani for my Sox Twins, and I used Manny Ramirez for my Sox Dodgers. Guess who I used for my Sox Nationals? Do you remember Bob James?
No.
He was Jeff Reardon's whatever passed for a setup man for the Expos in the
No.
80s. In the mid 80s, White Sox decided to throw a bunch of money at Bob James to make him their closer. And it didn't quite work out. Incidentally, just to finish the loop, because it was Cubs Sox Day and Immaculate Grid, I had Bill Campbell for Cubs Twins. I went old school. Billy Herman for Cubs Dodgers,
Oh, yeah.
and Woody Fryman for Cubs Nationals / Expos. I really try to go obscure with
Yeah, my Cubs Sox, I went all former Cubs center fielders.
I saw that.
Darren Jackson,
Well,
Trace Thompson, and Dave Martinez.
I liked your left-hand column. Who was it? Because I just saw who were the three guys? Was it the all 04 Dusty Cubs? It was Jose Macias, right, at the bottom.
Well, it was Jack
Was it?
Jones, Cesar Torres, and Jose
Yeah.
Macias.
That's all. Cesar Stirs in 07. He
Yeah.
almost nailed like late Dusty Cubs with that somehow.
I had
which
a lot.
would have
I had a
been-
lot of terrible Cub utility players. I had Caesar. Oh, I guess Caesar was a shortstop, but Jose, and I had Delino DeShields.
right, because you used
He
him
was my
for
he was my Expo Oriole.
yes. Well, national. Only us old school guys can take advantage of that one.
Yes. Yeah, the only one that didn't play for the Cubs on my whole list was Marty Cordova.
And
I
what
used
was
him
he?
for
Orioles?
Twins Orioles,
Yeah.
and he always sticks in my head because we talked about this. I think I'm sure we've talked about everything at least once. Ken Griffey Jr. didn't win MVP, didn't win Rookie of the Year, but he was so young when he broke in that he was younger than
In
the
the
next
next
seven American League Rookies of the Year, and the last one was Marty Cordova, who was like 29 or something, and just got him in under the gun. So I always remember Marty Cordova.
That's a pretty immaculate grid.
Oh, he's
Grid.
25. It's not quite
No.
as bad as I thought.
25. All right, yeah.
But still, 25 is old for a Rookie of the Year.
Well, it's 4.
Of course, Ichiro won it.
Well, and
But-
Hideo Nomo in '95. There are exceptions. They're rookies.
Yeah, I don't think that the Japanese guys should be eligible for Rookie of the Year.
Racist.
I think it's disrespect to the Japanese league. They've been professional baseball players. They should win MVP if
Sure.
they're good enough, but I don't think they should
Yeah.
win Rookie of the Year.
And Ichiro did, right? Is he the only other player besides Fred Lynn?
Yeah.
Did he win the MVP and all that? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and that was Immaculate Grid, for as good as it is a little. Sometimes what they're looking for can be a little squishy. We had the square the other day that was Rookie of the Year and MVP, and you couldn't tell if they had to have won it in the same year or not. And there's only two guys that you can use then if you think they had to be the MVP and Rookie of the Year in the same season.
year.
It's Ichiro and Fred. But they just wanted anybody who'd ever won both, but we didn't know that.
Right. Yeah, I think if it's a seasonal award, it has to happen the season in which they did it, and if it's a career award, they just had to pass through town. Which, to wrap it all up here, and I mentioned it like 2.5 hours ago at the beginning of this thing. Everybody does, like, whether you remember it or not, seems to come through the south side of Chicago in a baseball uniform. Like Ken Griffey, Manny Ramirez, those are the ones I mentioned.
Roberto Alomar twice.
Yeah, Sandy Alomar,
Carl Everett twice.
Yeah, I mean, you go on and on. It's weird, but nobody remembers it because, frankly, nobody remembers the White Sox.
I always think it's because they collect late career Hall of Famers just to say they have more Hall of Famers.
Sure.
Like they'll
I
just
mean,
sign like into the 2004 White Sox need Roberto Alomar to hit 203 for them in 18 games. Probably
hey,
not.
look, when you have a franchise that on average goes to the World Series once every 24 years, 5 times in 120 years, what else are you going to hang your hat on?
Yeah.
So,
Well, they have the. We didn't talk about this though. This is the last thing we talked about. They, for the longest time, they had the worst player that was in the Hall of Fame.
Harold Baines.
Well, no, they had Nellie Fox.
Oh, Nellie Fox,
And
absolutely.
then I
Right.
think they got worried somebody worse would get in, and they pushed. Now they have Harold Baines.
Right. That's it. That's
So now they're
great.
double covered.
I like it. That's right. They got like 2 basements secured.
You think
in the
that
Hall
guy
of
was
Fame.
mediocre? Here's Harold. All right. Well, that was fun.
I enjoyed it. Thanks, Andy.
Yep.
Many of us have herpes.
I just want this to be over.